In this video, you'll see how an ordinary guy enters another world and accidentally creates magical food that can subdue anyone who tastes it. Just one bite, and even kings and magicians fall to their knees in front of him. What started as a simple kitchen is turning into a weapon that has changed the whole world. Watch to the end, the finale will show how one chef was able to bring an entire kingdom to its knees. The golden-haired boy tasted the soup and was amazed by its flavor. The aroma and delicate texture made him close his eyes in pleasure. A cheerful girl with short brown hair stood nearby, proudly announcing that the dish was finally ready, as if she had made a great culinary discovery. Afterwards, Mila animatedly inquired whether Ed preferred a creamy stew or a clear broth, and immediately offered to serve him a plate. Meanwhile, Rena sheepishly noted that the prepared dish might not be enough for everyone, but her voice was lost in the joyful atmosphere. Meanwhile, the narrative shifted back to a few days ago. 3 schoolchildren were discussing a classmate around the corner. One noticed she'd gained a little weight, another quickly objected, but just then, a girl, passing by, overheard them and turned pale upon hearing the word pig. Later, in the car, the man congratulated Rena on her acceptance into high school. Her younger brother echoed his father's words, wishing her luck, and a genuine smile appeared on Rena's face as the family shared a brief but warm moment of happiness. Afterwards, one of the girls was tormented by doubts about whether she had done well enough and timidly asked if she could go there now. Her friend sat silently next to her and explained that everyone except her had fallen off the bridge into the river, and now all they could do was wait for help. In another scene, Mila, sprawled on the floor, could barely contain her delight at the ritual's success. She couldn't believe they'd managed to complete the summoning, joy mixed with disbelief, as if the impossible had happened. Then another girl woke up in the gloom, unsure whether she'd been rescued or had actually died. Hooded figures stood around, their silhouettes casting shadows on the stone floor. One of them quietly asked if they were the gods of death, and at that moment, a bright light blinded the room. When the light faded, the girl sank to her knees, stunned by the accusation that she was a saint. She desperately denied it, unable to comprehend what part of herself could deserve such a title. Then the silver-haired man abruptly declared that a fat woman couldn't be a saint. The girl behind him raised her head in disbelief and indignantly replied that ignorance in such matters was unacceptable, emphasizing her own certainty of being right. Then one of the women present angrily addressed the boy, reminding him that she had intended to summon a saint, not a pig. In response, another grabbed him by the hood and yanked him so hard that he barely managed to stay on his feet, not understanding how he had gotten himself into this mess. The story explained that the world was shrouded in a thick miasma, causing animals to transform into monsters. However, at the moment, no monsters were visible, even though the Valtar Empire, the hardest hit, was on the brink of collapse, as even the destruction of the monsters only temporarily alleviated the darkness. After this, the young man admitted he had been summoned there by mistake, and the girl with 2 ponytails timidly confirmed his words. Irritated, he couldn't resist and protested why he had been called not only a summoner but also a pig. When a flash of light blinded everyone, he thought someone had come to take him home. A girl standing nearby dreamily hoped that if this was all a dream, she would wake up soon and return to the familiar world. A moment later, another heroine lay with a peaceful expression, longing to see everyone she held dear. She hoped that by closing her eyes, she could meet them again, even if only for a brief moment.
I would be very happy if you subscribed to the channel, liked and wrote a comment rating this manga on a scale from 1 to 10. Your opinion is very important to me. This will help me better understand what my audience is interested in, because you are really important to me.
Then she woke up in a luxurious room, looking in confusion at the carved walls and silk sheets. Her thoughts were jumbled. Had she really fainted and been transported here? Or was this just a dream, where she found herself in the princess's chambers? The girl noticed grapes and an apple on the table, surprised by their unusual appearance. Then, wanting to make sure she wasn't dreaming, she suddenly cut her hand with a knife. As blood appeared on her skin, the realization struck like lightning: this wasn't a dream. Seeing the scarlet trickle, Rena screamed that it was real. Mila rushed toward her, panicking and asking what she was doing. Then Rena ordered Monica to immediately fetch the potion from the infirmary, and she, without hesitation, ran to obey. As Mila carefully poured the liquid onto the wound, she anxiously asked if it would hurt. Rena responded calmly, telling him to simply clean the cut, and he, flustered, admitted he felt almost no pain. After this, the girl clenched her fist, feeling relief. There was no longer any doubt, she really was in another world. Those nearby observed the scene and concluded that magic had been used for disinfection, marveling at its effectiveness. Finally, a man with silver hair and a slight smile entered the room. He introduced himself as Shuzel Grain of the Veltar Empire and warned her that his guest had nearly been hurt. The girl realized who stood before her and inwardly appreciated his majestic presence. It conveyed a sense of true nobility. Elphina sternly demanded that Igedalos apologize properly, not hiding the irritation in her voice. At the same time, Rina noticed someone else was present in the room, and the young man, finally realizing the consequences of his brother's outburst, hesitantly began to justify himself, feeling the tension growing. Cain then offered an awkward apology, but his words sounded insincere and arrogant, causing Rina to freeze in shock, unable to believe what she'd heard. Mila, meanwhile, flushed with anger and indignantly demanded an explanation, not understanding what kind of apology he was offering. After this, Cain sharply reprimanded Igedalos, causing him to wince in pain and embarrassment. Rina, trying to remain calm, merely remarked that she had heard an overly blunt opinion, and someone present quietly added that Cain, apparently, was quite merciless even to his own family. Then Cain, with cold harshness, chided the girl for causing chaos by trusting an old, dubious book on summoning magic. She, stunned by his words, couldn't understand why her actions were causing such outrage, and only listened in confusion to every word. Then Elphina, trying to ease the tension, calmly addressed Rina. She noted that although the summoning was for the sake of the country, from the saint's perspective, it seemed more like a kidnapping. These words made Rina tense internally, for they rang true. After a short pause, Elphina sincerely apologized for what had happened and promised that all those responsible would be justly punished. A girl standing in the background froze with a forced smile, unsure how to respond to such a serious conversation. Then a chill ran down Rina's spine. She sensed this was not a man to be trifled with. The maid standing next to her nodded quietly and whispered a short, "I understand," as if acknowledging that it was best not to tempt fate. The next morning, Rina found her clothes light and comfortable, nothing like the attire of a noblewoman. Two nearby girls sighed with relief, watching her, as if reassured that she was comfortable in her new surroundings. Reflecting on what had happened, Rina realized she had suddenly become bolder than she thought. In another world, crying would have been natural, but she still couldn't sleep. When the maid asked if the dress fit, she gratefully thanked her for her concern. Then Lana, a little confused, asked the maid to tell her more about the country, explaining that she had only a vague understanding of the local customs. The maid, bowing politely, agreed to explain everything in more detail if she didn't mind. During their conversation, Rina learned that the Veltar Empire was one of the 7 great states, and that the recently deceased emperor had been succeeded by his eldest son. Princes Shuzel and Igedalos, whom they had seen earlier, turned out to be his younger brothers, which genuinely surprised Mila. Later, a maid brought breakfast, and Rina, surprised, thanked her. The other two maids exchanged glances, admiring the fact that the emperor himself had personally permitted her presence and did not object to such unusual treatment. The maids cautiously inquired if there was enough food, and Rina, still stunned by the cultural differences, apologized for her surprise. She added that even a palace needn't mean luxury, and expressed her sincere gratitude for the hospitality. Afterwards, she carefully examined the soup. The gently simmering vegetables exuded a light, herbal aroma. Rina wondered if the bread had hardened because it had been sitting for several days, and automatically listed them in her mind: potatoes, carrots, onions. Mila advised her to soak the bread in the soup to soften it. But Rina, somewhat stubbornly, replied that she preferred crunchy croutons and rice crackers, sensing that her tastes were being misunderstood. At that moment, someone quietly wished her luck. Cain approached her with a smile and asked how she had slept the night before. His friendliness seemed surprising for so early in the morning, and Rina thanked him, replying that her rest had been better than expected, albeit with some troubling thoughts. After breakfast, she reflected on the morning's events, and Cain suggested that food would have been enough to ruin anyone's appetite. Rina, meanwhile, recalled Prince Shuzel, noting how, despite his frailty, he exuded health and inner strength. Soon, Will, introducing himself as the secretary of the magic department, greeted Rina politely. She responded modestly, and he explained that they had arrived early in the hopes that she would allow him to conduct a magical assessment. The white-haired man began explaining that there were 7 main schools of magic, including elemental and sacred ones. The girl listened with interest and admitted that she knew magic existed, but hadn't realized its scope. The silver-haired mage then explained that only a few were capable of wielding magic and asked permission to evaluate her abilities. Rina agreed, hoping to help this country, and the 2 people standing nearby expressed sincere understanding and gratitude. Rina hesitated briefly before touching the crystal, but the silver-haired man gently assured her it wouldn't hurt. He offered to demonstrate the process, understanding it was her first time, while the girl standing next to her whispered anxiously, wondering if she'd get an electric shock. The man explained that her parameters would be displayed similarly and asked her to place her right hand on the table. Rina, holding her breath, admired the technological, almost game-like sensation of what was happening, although somewhere deep down she feared she would disappoint them if it turned out that magic was inaccessible to her. When she was suddenly called chubby, Rina froze in bewilderment, unsure how to react. Mila flushed with anger and sharply retorted, demanding an explanation of who exactly was being referred to. Meanwhile, Roland and Oscar, without interfering, silently observed this strange exchange. Alfina, realizing she'd offended the girl, apologized, and the others exchanged confused glances. Then she calmly explained that possessing 4 magical attributes and the rare skill of appraisal is extremely rare, which in itself commands respect. After this, Rina was asked to pronounce the word evaluation while looking at a vial nearby. She immediately recognized the potion used earlier, and the interlocutor added that the spell's results are unique to each person and that they would be told more about the nature of magic later. Rina concentrated and cast an appraisal spell on the potion, seeing the information about its healing properties surface. The man had warned her not to use this skill on people, as reading someone else's data violated personal boundaries, and she couldn't help but wonder if it worked on people. The girl promised to be careful, and the prince explained that if someone had a higher ability to evaluate, it was impossible to learn information about them. He added that such a discovery could be frightening if the truth were accidentally uncovered. Sitting on the couch, Rina reflected on how, despite everything, she could use magic. The thought of her own value, even without the title of saint, was a small comfort, though living in a world that resembled a game still left her uneasy. Later, lying on her bed, she thought about the many new things she'd seen for the first time, and sadly admitted that the local food wasn't enjoyable. Her gaze fell on an apple, and something familiar surfaced in her mind, as if it held an important memory. Then she came up with the idea of using apples to create a sourdough starter to bake soft bread. This thought gave her strength, because every time she ate a stale slice, she dreamed of a warm baked good made from the familiar ingredients of her home world. Mila suddenly perked up, remembering the garden outside her window, where plants grew. Enthusiastically, she decided to check if there were any apples or other fruits there that could be used for baking or food experiments. Inspired, Mila felt an unexpected sense of joy and confidence that she could adapt to her new life. Meanwhile, Rina and Kane stood behind her, watching her with serious expressions, as if they saw this as a symbol of hope. Later, Lana offered Renee a cup of tea, which she accepted gratefully. Taking a sip, she remarked on the deliciousness of the drink, made from simple leaves, and thought that perhaps she was slowly beginning to adjust to this world. The girl recalled the tour of the palace and her first magic lessons. The man explained that there were 7 schools of magic, and whoever mastered 6 received the title of sage. Hearing that she was already being called a great archmage, Rina didn't know how to react. A little later, the man regretfully apologized for the chaos caused by his subordinates, who had been responsible for her summoning. Rina gently replied that she held no grudge and reflected that, despite their mistakes, the people of this country were truly kind. Meanwhile, a maid, hearing a noise in the hallway, wondered why it was so lively today. Another servant quickly called attention to the door, and a young girl, calmly sipping her tea, chuckled to herself, remembering the frivolous prince and his retinue. A moment later, a loud noise was heard, and an excited maid announced that His Majesty Felix had returned. Hearing this, Rina froze, unable to believe her ears, as she hadn't expected to encounter the king himself. Mila, overcome with excitement, realized they were about to have an audience with the emperor. Rina hastily insisted she change and literally dragged her away from the tea table as she stood there, stunned by the news. Frightened, the girl began to panic, imagining what would happen if the ruler discovered she was no saint at all. Nearby, a small pig-like creature grumbled that the country didn't need a pig and grimly predicted the end if the emperor was displeased. A solemn announcement rang out in the vast, crowded hall. Prime Minister Shuzal and Lady Rina Noera had arrived to pay their respects to Emperor Felix. Cheerful yet trembling on the inside, the young woman tried to appear confident, though her heart pounded in panic. Roland, sitting with a confident posture, coolly declared that unnecessary ceremony was unnecessary and ordered the guests to approach without delay. When Rina Nohara's name was mentioned, he nodded, indicating their visit was expected. The girl trembled, feeling the oppressive presence of a dark silhouette descending the stairs. At that moment, a silver-haired man calmly asked her to look up, introducing himself as Noera Rina, noting that this was their first official meeting. She looked up in surprise, and Roland casually remarked that she had once been kidnapped by fools. The silver-haired man immediately noted that these fools were led by his younger brother and coldly demanded that they be spoken of with respect. Rina timidly explained that she was a stranger from another world, asking the king and prime minister to show leniency. The king, without changing his calm tone, replied that if there had been rudeness, it was unintentional, as even the kidnapping had been an accident. Mila, visibly nervous, tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. At that moment, someone gently patted her head, and Elfina, smiling warmly, gave her a look of silent approval as if to say she'd done well. Then Roland addressed Shuzal by name. He responded with a polite bow, and Mila, watching their exchange, couldn't help but think that even a calm conversation between these two seemed terrifying, and she smiled tensely. Sitting at the head of the hall, Roland apologetically acknowledged his brother's mistakes, but soon asked Rina point-blank if she really was a saint. She, a little taken aback, admitted she wasn't sure whether holiness or the power of holy magic even existed. Roland then turned to the emperor and, frowning, doubted whether it was even worthwhile to invoke the saint if it was unknown whether she would help the country or the world. The emperor merely sighed heavily, mentally acknowledging that he had been drawn into this situation against his will. With a wry smile, Roland mockingly declared that in his case, he'd rather destroy the country than save it. Mila shuddered in horror, and Rina quietly acknowledged that these people truly did have a frightening power. Soon, the dark-haired man politely apologized for the suddenness of his visit and left the room. The silver-haired man, noticing the girl's fatigue, gently suggested she rest, showing a rare display of concern and understanding. After this, Roland, once again taking his seat, addressed the kingdom's greatest sage, Shuzal, asking if he could return the girl to her home world. A man standing nearby watched the conversation with a tense expression. Cain intervened, explaining that the ritual to summon the saint was currently impossible and could not be repeated for the next 100 years. Rina wondered if perhaps the day of her summoning had coincided with special conditions that would never be repeated. The emperor, looking tired on his throne, quietly told his advisor that he could not grant Renee a special position. Instead, he asked for her support, as responsibility for her fate now rested with everyone. A few days later, one of the girls noticed that Rina had noticeably lost weight. They were standing outside a building with large windows, surrounded by greenery, and the light softly reflected off the glass, emphasizing her weakened appearance. When asked about her weight loss, Rina quickly replied that everything was fine, denying any weakness. A woman nearby calmly offered to help, seeing her struggling with fatigue. Then Rina admitted that she'd started running in the mornings to occupy herself in a world without a phone or the usual distractions. Mila tried to speak more confidently after being advised not to be overly polite. Rina sheepishly apologized, calling herself too sweet, and Mila, confused, tried to remember the prince's name, whether it was Yeki or Iji. Lana quietly revealed the truth, saying he was currently in an underground prison. Rina cautiously asked if Lana was angry with him because of her, but she calmly replied that everything was simply going on as usual, with no personal animosity. Later, Cain noticed someone had lost weight again and mentioned it casually. The girl thought irritably that the appraisal magic still considered her chubby, despite all her efforts, and she clenched her fists in frustration. She then timidly asked the prince where exactly the underground prison was, and whether it had anything to do with Igetalos. He responded calmly, explaining that punishment alone wouldn't change anything, but he was interested in learning what the consequences would be. At that moment, the young man in uniform nodded understandingly. A boy standing nearby, barely containing his excitement, exclaimed, calling him Big Brother, and this cry instantly attracted the attention of everyone in the hallway. The girl asked doubtfully how plump she had once been if the appraisal magic still considered her chubby. Behind bars, the guy angrily shouted at her to ask if she was even listening, and another, trying to diffuse the tension, remarked that she had clearly lost weight, for which he promptly slapped her. Kane sternly ordered Igedalos to be silent, his voice so harsh that he froze, staring at the floor with tears in his eyes. The maid next to him clasped her hands, mentally condemning the young man for his misbehavior, but not daring to intervene. Meanwhile, Mila, still cheerful, began calling out to Rina, playfully mangling her name. The girl cautiously corrected her, saying that the correct name was Igedalos, but then smiled, sensing a warm human connection in this light-hearted game. Then Mila worriedly asked if Igedalos was okay, but the short-haired girl sharply called her a fool. The silver-haired man froze and, realizing the awkwardness of the moment, quickly apologized, feeling the tension rising. After a brief pause, Kane asked if it was really worth releasing them from custody. Rina agreed, as long as they didn't cause any more trouble, noting that it would be better to let them figure out how to get her home. Mila, hearing this, raised her hand with another question. Alfina calmly explained that her living expenses were being covered by the state due to the unexpected circumstances. But Rina firmly insisted that these funds should be deducted from the salaries of those who participated in the draft, much to the surprise of the two men nearby. With a slight smile, Alfina added that it was the responsibility of those who summoned her to provide support. The girl next to her nodded silently, without objection, and Roland, watching them, silently noted that this woman was too strong to argue with. Later, Mila, slightly tired but still curious, asked Ed where the DOS ending in the strange word came from, and why saints and heroes in ancient texts were always described in such idealized terms. He paused, searching for an answer. Rina calmly explained that she was indeed looking for a saint, not a bride, while the young man hesitated and tried to justify himself, explaining that in old legends the image of a saint often had negative connotations. Indignant, Rina declared that the correct answer should have been an unhesitating yes. The young man, in turn, questioned why a saint had to be a woman, complaining that even ancient stories suffer from male egocentrism. Mila gasped in shock, and Alvina mused that perhaps the hero could be a hairy, foul-smelling barbarian with an axe. The others laughed, imagining him demanding all the best women for himself, turning the legend into farce. Then Rina confidently declared that she would go first, though the others sighed wearily, dismissing the idea as foolhardy. However, one of those present smiled quietly, recognizing that there was something strong and genuine in her determination. The next morning, the girl complained of a sore throat, thinking she'd lost her voice during the previous day's lecture. A boy next to her asked where she'd gone so early, and she quickly turned away, denying she'd intended to return to her former world. Kane raised his eyebrows in surprise, trying to comprehend what had happened, and Roland, slightly nervous, began apologizing for the multitude of misunderstandings. Rina merely watched them quietly, trying to comprehend what was happening and not interfere. Soon she informed the princess that breakfast was ready, to which she reacted with surprise, not expecting to eat together. Mila teasingly asked if the princess was being honest with herself, causing her to blush and become embarrassed. At that moment, Monica pulled a strange object out of her bag, causing surprise. She explained that it was a magical bag based on a spatial spell, and everyone began whispering in amazement about a fourth-dimensional pocket. The girl excitedly asked if Ed had one, and when he denied it, she stubbornly declared that she still wanted one, even though she was reminded there was nothing to put in it. The guy looked at her calmly, as if seriously considering her whim. The dark-haired girl then asked how large the storage capacity of such an artifact was. The silver-haired man explained that his older brother had a much larger storage space, but added that permission could only be granted with his approval. Mila excitedly asked if a person could fit in there, and upon hearing the answer, she gasped in admiration. Rina, feeling a chill down her spine, thought such a question sounded too suspicious, almost like a criminal's. The girl timidly asked if Ed had ever been inside such a vault, and he, lowering his voice, admitted that his brother, Shuz, had experienced it firsthand. She recalled how Shuz had once been locked in a chamber of reflections until his older brother came to the rescue. The girl cautiously suggested they be more careful, but the silver-haired man, calmly sipping his tea, replied that he didn't need warnings. Afterward, they both politely thanked each other for the treat, and a relaxed, almost homely, calm settled between them. Full and satisfied, they rose from the table. The girl cheerfully remarked that she thought she'd go for a walk, since her belly was full. The guy asked if she was free, and then realized with surprise that, despite her words, she was still following him. Ed noted that the young man was being considerate, trying not to leave him alone. The girl, however, thought that Ed's manners and gentle smile reminded her of her own brother, and suddenly asked if he was eating properly, which slightly embarrassed the young man. Mila admitted she didn't particularly like bread and wondered if others liked it. Rina, looking around the table, asked if they had a jar of the right size, and Mila, perking up, suggested that perhaps she could make soft bread herself. The short-haired girl sternly warned the boy that she would be angry if he tried to hit anything with the can. Just then, Lana entered the room, just as the boy asked the maid to bring apples, a can, and a knife, causing everyone to be quite surprised. Mila eagerly asked about yeast and how to soften bread, while Rina calmly explained that apples should be sliced, peeled, and then placed in a jar of water. She confidently added that this is how the apples will make the bread soft and fluffy. Mila asked what exactly Rina was planning to do with the bread, to which Rina calmly replied, "That's all." Mila looked confused, then flushed and loudly declared that she wasn't stupid at all, making everyone present laugh. Rina assured him that the results would be visible in 4 or 5 days, but the young man doubted the wait was worth it. Then the man in uniform calmly remarked that everything delicious takes time, and the conversation became less tense. Mila asked Lana if she could use the kitchen, and she agreed, a little hesitantly. She happily grabbed Kane's hand, dragging him along as he grumbled about her recklessness, and Roland merely chuckled and promised to keep an eye on everything. The cheerful girl excitedly declared that she would definitely cook something delicious for Ed. He blinked in surprise and asked if he'd heard right, as no one expected that from her. Entering the pantry, the girl gazed admiringly at the palace's supplies. The variety of foodstuffs neatly arranged on the shelves amazed her. She had never seen so many varieties of vegetables, meats, and grains. Rina carefully sorted through the vegetables and dairy products, noting the abundance of root vegetables and chicken. When Mila asked if she could cook anything, Rina replied with a smile that with such a selection of ingredients, she could work wonders. Before cooking began, Rina asked if she could really take over the kitchen. The head chef responded with interest, saying he'd long wanted to experience foreign cuisine, and the prince, with a slight chuckle, warned her to at least make sure the food was edible. Soon, the conversation turned to the chef's origins, who, it turned out, also came from another world. 3 men in military uniform exchanged worried glances when they heard the girl address Prince Egedelos without due respect. One of them stepped forward and firmly corrected her, emphasizing the correct pronunciation of her name. The girl, looking at the chicken bones, asked in surprise if they would use the whole carcass. The boy casually replied that they usually just throw away the bones, which left her genuinely shocked. Rina, frowning slightly, said they'd have to start from the very basics, since they didn't even know what dashi, the base of any broth, was. Mila doubted the liquid's benefits, though she found the aroma pleasant, and later the conversation turned to the magic stone that heated the stove. The girl explained that she was going to boil chicken bones, after first rinsing them to remove any blood, to create a rich broth. Mila offered to help, and Roland quietly thanked her, watching the process with respect. Rina, smiling cheerfully, explained the blanching process, demonstrating how to skim off the foam and prepare the soup base. The man holding the bowl questioned whether it was really necessary to boil the ingredients after peeling. She patiently explained that skimming off the foam makes the flavor cleaner and richer. The others watched intently as she carefully skimmed off the gray flakes, wondering why she would throw away something that had been boiling in the water. Mila asked curiously what she meant by foam, and Rina, with a slight smile, explained that it was like how children ask endless questions about everything. The others watched them with curiosity and slight confusion, not daring to interrupt. Rina, a little bored, asked the young man's name, but almost immediately regretted getting involved and decided to ignore it. Nevertheless, the young man introduced himself as Lutz Clark, Lana's younger brother, and a maid stood quietly behind him, trying not to disturb him. Lana happily confirmed that she did indeed have a brother, much to the surprise of her neighbor, who couldn't quite believe her ears. At this point, the chef turned to Renee, asking what to do next, and then ordered her to thoroughly wash the prepared ingredients. Kane explained that the bones in the pot weren't garbage, but chicken bones, and that a long simmer would produce a flavorful consommé. Rina stood behind him, listening intently and trying to memorize every detail of the preparation. Then Mila suggested adding some vegetables and white wine, as sake was hard to come by here. Rina watched her actions in surprise, not immediately understanding what exactly she was trying to do with the broth. Mila, unabashed, declared she was making chicken consommé, despite Kane's irritation. She then calmly explained the cooking process and added that she prefers using dashi granules over natural ingredients for convenience and flavor. Mila then added that instead of bones, you could boil the whole chicken to make a thick, nutritious paitan soup. Rina nodded thoughtfully, and the chef clarified that to achieve this result, you need to simmer it for at least 3 to 4 hours over low heat. Despite advice to rest, Rina insisted on keeping an eye on the stove herself. The others exchanged glances, worried that the kitchen stove would be occupied for a long time, but decided not to argue with her stubbornness. Later, the girl hurried up to the young man sitting at the table, sipping tea, certain she'd been a bit late because she'd been reading in the library. He, looking at her calmly, noticed her lateness, and this made her feel cold inside. Ed was leisurely sipping his tea when the girl asked if he was free. He shook his head, while the other guy was surprised to see a table and chair appear, remembering the promised 3-hour wait. Roland, sitting with an air of composure, declared that he intended to wait until the end for the promised delicious dish, and with a grin asked whether his interlocutor was really more interested in discussing waste than the result of his labor. The girl noted with a touch of irony that the prince was apparently accustomed to such duties in feigned apology for her impertinence. The prince remained silent, but his tense shoulders revealed that the joke had stung him more than he'd intended. Later, two maids cautiously asked if Rina had actually prepared the dish herself, noting that she had boiled chicken bones. The maid shook her head, explaining that they had already finished their work and were simply taking a break, causing a mixed reaction from everyone. Holding the bowl, Rina reflected with a touch of nostalgia that it had been a while since she'd made this dish and was afraid it would turn out poorly. However, looking at the rich broth with its floating vegetables, she realized the result was surprisingly good. A girl with short hair invited Mr. Lutz to try the soup, and the maids asked if she would mind chicken. Rina admitted she loved it, but was still worried about how it would taste this time. Mila impatiently demanded a reaction from the blushing young chef. He stuttered and uttered only an uncertain which irritated her. She demanded not just sounds, but a clear taste response. Mila suggested that someone else try the soup to save time. Rina timidly asked for another spoon, and Kane poured some and handed it to Oscar, who accepted the cup with surprise and prepared to take a sip. The boy sipped carefully from the cup under the girl's watchful gaze. At first, he flinched slightly, but then his eyes lit up with a smile. He admitted that the taste was truly amazing, and warmth spread throughout the room. Rina looked up in surprise as two girls joyfully shouted her name and asked to try it. One of the boys sighed in exasperation, blaming Monica for not having the courage to try it sooner, causing laughter and surprise from the others. Mila enthusiastically suggested dividing the soup in half and making a creamy stew with one half. Rina, standing at the stove, turned around in disbelief, and Kane exclaimed, "What are you doing?" At that moment, the child in the corner burst into tears, complaining that Rina was being mean. The girl explained that white sauce was a type of milk soup, stirring butter and flour. The boy tensed, watching the bubbling mixture, and another girl tearfully declared that she hated milk soups, but she wasn't cooking for Monica. One of the girls gently asked Monica for more milk, noticing the tears streaming down her cheeks. Another came closer and quietly assured her that she didn't need to force herself to eat if she didn't want to, trying to comfort her friend during this awkward moment. On the table stood 2 pots labeled creamy stew and consommé soup. The girl cheerfully asked if the dishes were finished, and everyone watched her eagerly as she turned to Ed with a smile, awaiting his approval. She carefully handed him a spoon, urging him to try the dish. Ed was surprised at first, but then smiled and admitted that the taste was simply wonderful. The girl next to him beamed with happiness, as if this were her own personal triumph. Mila cheerfully asked Ed which of the 2 soups he liked best. When he pointed to one, she giggled and decided to serve it, while Rina, watching from the sidelines, curiously watched what she was about to demonstrate. Mila enthusiastically praised the dish, calling it incredibly delicious, and the others, joining in, began excitedly admiring how super delicious and surprisingly successful the food was. Shared laughter and satisfied faces filled the kitchen with a warm atmosphere. The creamy stew received particularly high praise. Mila cheerfully slapped the young man on the back, explaining that Monica had chosen this dish because His Highness ate it with obvious pleasure, while playfully teasing him about his dislike of milk. Meanwhile, the chefs stood aside, stunned by the reaction. Two of them muttered quietly that the soup tasted like boiled water, and Rina, with a slight smile, admitted that this explained her confusion. One of the chefs nervously defended himself, claiming that the recipe wasn't his at all. Rina reflected that her home world had developed the art of cooking, while this one had developed magic. Two chefs nearby argued over whether the difference was purely cultural, and a young man standing nearby admitted that magic impressed him far more than the taste of food. Mila cheerfully encouraged Lutz, advising him not to be afraid to learn and to ask for help if something wasn't working. At that moment, someone in the distance shouted for Rina to hurry, and she quickly headed that way. Mila enthusiastically raised her hand and invited everyone who wanted to learn from her to raise theirs as well. People around her reacted with surprise and gratitude, while Alfina, standing to the side, watched with a quiet smile. Rina turned to Ed, who, a little embarrassed, asked for another batch so his older brothers could try it too. The others watched this brief but warm exchange with interest. The young man thought that, despite his outward rudeness, he genuinely cared about his brothers. He also noted that this might be the first time he'd heard Rina say his name. She, noticing his genuine smile, blushed and silently admitted that he was charming. Mila began to babble about the ingredients, but Rina apologized, explaining that they were out of chicken bones and even if they started now, they wouldn't be ready in time for dinner. These words visibly surprised Roland, who was accustomed to perfect order. Then Mila suggested making something else instead of the creamy stew, and Rina agreed, noting that it was unlikely to turn out anything special. She was more concerned about whether the demon lord would like the dish than the result itself. Kane happily thanked Rina, but she only blinked in confusion, unsure of what exactly. Another girl nearby worriedly noted that this whole situation could have unexpected consequences. Mila was seriously worried about the upcoming dinner for Emperor Felix and Prince Shuzel, afraid they wouldn't like her food. Alfina, sitting a little further away, thought it would be her first time dining next to Ed, whom she barely knew. Kane thoughtfully listed the dishes that his brothers loved, and Mila, trying not to miss a word, diligently wrote everything down in a notebook, nodding in time with each of his remarks. The serious-looking young man listened to two girls discuss his tastes and quietly confirmed that he preferred meat to fish or sweets. One of them chuckled, noting that this suited the image of a demonic ruler quite well. Alfina calmly explained that His Highness Shuzel had no interest in food. Mila, shocked, asked if she'd heard right, and panicked as she wondered how she'd cope if she had to cook for both a demon and a hermit. The girl muttered doubtfully, wondering if the potions were the reason she was gaining weight. The boy chuckled and explained that his older brother, Shuz, was convinced the potions made him invulnerable. The others exchanged glances, unsure whether to admire his faith or be surprised by his naivety. The group was discussing a suspicious man who barely ate anything, even when coaxed. They wondered if he'd ever shown any interest in food, and someone quietly agreed that it was indeed worrisome. The girl wondered if His Highness Shuzel liked sweets, and the boy recalled that he often tried sweet beans and traditional bean candies. Hearing this, she mentally imagined something delicate and sweet, as if inspired. Then Mila excitedly announced she'd make dessert. The others exchanged surprised glances, and someone admitted they loved not only making sweets but also just looking at them as they walked together to the kitchen. Finding herself at the grocery shelves, Mila examined the milk, butter, sugar, and stale bread, trying to figure out what to make with them. Someone nearby remarked that with her skills, she could cook anything, though he himself admitted he was a much worse cook. After a brief moment of thought, Mila cheerfully suggested making French toast, a sweet bread soaked in a milk mixture. She asked Lutz to cut the bread into round slices, but he skeptically remarked that Prince Shuzel probably wouldn't even try it. Mila, unabashed, replied that if His Highness liked sweets, he'd definitely try it. Rina wondered if perhaps he'd be drawn to a dish from another world, while the young man standing behind her nervously scratched the back of his head, watching the proceedings. Mila vigorously whisked the eggs, while the silver-haired man calmly instructed, after mixing, add sugar and milk to create a custard base. Two girls in the background quietly discussed the smell and consistency of the mixture. Mila looked slightly embarrassed when Rina assured her the bread would remain soft. At that moment, the chef asked Lutz to place the slices in a baking dish to soak before frying, and the entire kitchen filled with the pleasant aroma of sweet milk. In the kitchen, one girl impatiently asked if she could try the remaining batter, staring intently at the bowl. Another excitedly declared she wanted to make another pudding and asked Lutz to find some heat-resistant glass. Everyone watched tensely as one of them hesitated before taking an important step. Finally, she muttered that she was doing it for His Highness Schuzel, while the others encouraged her with their glances, trying not to disturb the concentrated atmosphere. Soon, Rina nearly set the sugar on fire, causing a fright among everyone around. Someone asked in surprise if sugar was a luxury item, while another quietly remarked that it all reminded one of old Europe with its rare sweets. When the caramel finally reached a uniform amber color, the girl carefully poured in a little hot water to complete the sauce. Then she set out the heat-proof glasses and refrigerated them, deciding to steam the pudding this time. Rina animatedly explained that she prefers steamed pudding because baking hardens the caramel on top. She enthusiastically described how fun it was to eat the caramelized layer, and a guy standing next to her asked why she poured boiling water into the pan. Mila confidently replied that he was her mentor and added that she would be making pudding in a double boiler. The man, on the contrary, insisted that she address him respectfully, although she jokingly suggested that she needn't be formal. Later, Mila cheerfully greeted Ed, but he looked serious and told her not to call him mentor. Mila playfully retorted, and a bystander quietly remarked that they really did act like brother and sister. Mila then animatedly asked if ice magic existed and whether it could be used. Upon hearing the confirmation, she enthusiastically asked for some ice to cool the dessert, and the man, slightly embarrassed, agreed to help. Kane carefully used ice magic, instantly cooling the pudding. Mila thanked him happily, and he, watching the evaporating frost, wondered aloud if magic wasn't too convenient for everyday use. Mila asked curiously about the freezer, and Rina explained the difference between a refrigerator and a freezer. Kane added that the cooling was magical, thanks to a special stone embedded in the unit. The girl smiled and explained that in her world, cold desserts like ice cream and sorbet exist. On hot days, she said, water can be frozen and added to tea, creating a refreshing treat. Kane looked at her with delight, his eyes practically sparkling. Mila, surprised, asked why he was so excited, and Rina calmly reminded him that even if the dessert was a success, Monica still wouldn't be able to try it. Mila inquired if the bread had absorbed all the liquid, then noted with relief that it had absorbed every last drop. All that remained was to fry the slices in butter. A little nervous, she turned to Mr. Lutz and asked him to help with the frying. The dark-haired girl and the silver-haired boy admired the bread's golden crust and sweet aroma. The blonde companion sniffed the bread, wondering what this unusual dessert would taste like. A plate of fluffy French toast sat on the table. Rina accepted the dish with a slight bow and thanked them for their efforts, while someone nearby praised the result as a true success, though in the back of the room, one chef suppressed an exasperated sigh. Mila hesitated over how to garnish the airy, syrup-soaked slices, but finally couldn't resist drizzling it generously over them, despite her fear of gaining weight. Rina asked for feedback, and Mila happily declared that everything had turned out perfectly. With a beaming smile, Mila announced that she was about to serve French toast to His Highness Schuzel and Ed. One of them looked up in surprise, while Rina, standing a little distance away, silently observed their reactions. Rina asked if there was any bread left, to which the girl cheerfully replied that calling someone spoiled was unnecessary. The prince, instead of being offended, accepted the joke with a smile, as if taking it as a compliment. Two excited girls almost in unison exclaimed that they also wanted a piece, and the younger girl standing between them looked at them in bewilderment, not understanding the reason for such a strong desire. The argument escalated in earnest, with each participant demanding the last slice of bread for herself. One insisted it should go to the prettiest woman, while the other loudly declared that women rightfully deserved it, especially if they included royalty. The kitchen filled with shouts and indignant voices. The cooks, watching the chaos, couldn't believe their eyes, and one of them cried out in despair that causing such a frenzy over a dessert was beyond reason. At that moment, the head chef burst into the kitchen with a menacing grin, demanding an explanation of what was going on. The girl looked at Ed anxiously and asked who would stop this mess, and he, lowering his voice, admitted that he would probably have to intervene himself. Roland approached and, coldly and without further ado, demanded an explanation from the cooks. Mila, looking at him, nervously whispered who this stern man was, and felt the tension growing inside her. Later, the entire group emerged into the hallway, where they were met by a man with an impassive face and an awkward greeting. One of the women wearily noted that he greeted them with good morning, even though it was well past evening. The girl timidly explained that Rina was cooking for her older brother, Shuz, who barely ate. The serious man, hearing this, addressed Ed with restraint, calling him a girl from another world. Rina calmly introduced herself as a foreigner and explained that she had prepared desserts, pudding and French toast, especially for His Highness Shuzel, as she had heard that he avoided food. A man in a formal suit politely inquired who she was, maintaining an air of politeness. The girl with the ribbon in her hair shyly thanked Ed for standing up for her during this tense moment. Then the head butler introduced himself with restraint as Abel, without a surname, explaining that he was responsible for the emperor's meals. The others listened attentively, trying not to interrupt, sensing his calm authority. Mila, holding the pudding in both hands, felt anxious. Despite the support of those around her, she feared that one of the nobles would look down on her. She explained that the dessert was intended as a gift for His Highness Shuzel. One of the workers, without looking in her direction, proposed a schedule: 1 day of work, 10 days of rest, and then, smiling, asked whether the plan should be updated, noticing the girl's worried look. Mila enthusiastically handed the drink to the man, urging him to try it. He hesitated, but then took a sip, nodding briefly in approval. The others watched silently, as if afraid to disturb the moment. Kane calmly pulled out an object and silently placed it in his dimensional bag. Rina, Mila, and the others froze, stunned by his composure. No words, no explanation, just a silent action, full of hidden meaning. The girl enthusiastically explained that he preferred to savor the taste alone, leisurely. The man awkwardly asked if she liked the dish, while another girl nearby listened to the conversation with a serious expression, as if weighing every word. Roland glanced at the book and explained that the rush was simply because His Majesty was waiting. Mila, beaming with joy, thanked him for the pudding and firmly promised that one day she would make the emperor smile with food. The man asked if she had prepared anything for Emperor Felix. Mila replied that she would soon and asked them to wait a little, after which someone loudly commanded everyone to hurry, as the main course, the meat, had already been served. Mila asked Ed if she could cook cheese and egg dishes for King Felix, noting that there were plenty of eggs in the kitchen. Ed confirmed that there were many varieties of cheese, much to Roland's surprise. Kane hesitantly admitted he couldn't remember the prince's name, and Mila glared at him. Oscar intervened, explaining that His Highness disliked nicknames and preferred salty snacks like cheese with his alcohol. In the kitchen, the girl decided to make a simple dish, and the guy asked in surprise if she was going to make pudding again. She smiled and replied that she wouldn't make sweets for someone who didn't like them. The girl calmly explained the cooking steps while pouring the egg mixture into the pan. The guy asked curiously if it was a regular omelette, but she clarified that the egg was just a shell for the melted cheese inside. Ed smiled and agreed to eat more, and the girl promised to make another serving with extra cheese. The two girls watched in silence in the back of the kitchen, exchanging knowing glances. Rina, having considered the situation, decided to prepare some light appetizers to go with the wine. Meanwhile, the girl finished another dish, thanked her for the advice, and Rina asked her to stay nearby and observe the process. Mila cheerfully explained that the fried cheese was slightly salty but wonderfully crispy. Rina calmly assured them that everything was going well, despite the slight burning, and the delicious sizzle of melted cheese emanated from the pan. Mila approached Rick, asking if he drank. He admitted he did, and she offered him a drink. Abel gently asked her not to address him as sir, and someone remarked that he seemed to be a true connoisseur of alcohol. The head chef was barely able to contain the urge to pour himself a glass of wine, while the others smiled and noted that Chef Rick and Abel looked suspiciously pleased. The girl next to her could sense the tension emanating from the two inveterate drinkers. Mila cheerfully inquired whether the cheese omelette for her brother was ready, and Rina instructed Kane to convey her regards to His Highness Shuzel. A serious Roland nodded and promised to personally ensure everything was delivered on time. Mila explained to Ed that it's important to eat with pleasure and subtly hint at dessert to spark interest. Rina added that if he gives everything at once, his appetite will quickly wane and the effect will be lost. Eddie served a cheese omelette, and someone asked in surprise what it was. After tasting it, he praised its taste, and a third participant in the scene, watching from the sidelines, asked with a hint of jealousy if they would get any. Kane admired the airy texture in the gooey cheese, while another man added that it was the first time he'd seen his older brother so animated during a meal. He smiled and asked Edie where their own portions were. Alphina smiled softly when Kane noted with alarm that if they served everything at once, the interest wouldn't last long. The butler then calmly reminded them that the next course wouldn't be served until the current one was finished, and that order must be maintained. The girl worriedly asked her brother if he thought it was unfair, noticing that he hadn't touched his food. He curtly told her to just drink her potion, then abruptly ordered her to be quiet, shocking everyone present. At the dinner table, one character hunched over an omelette while another explained that Rina had made pudding and French toast especially for Shuz, urging him to finish the main course quickly. Roland, intrigued, asked if the girl had prepared this unusual delicacy. Oscar enthusiastically replied that yes, it was a magical dish from another world, created by Rina in just a few minutes. Roland pondered the Emperor's complex feelings for his younger brother, unwittingly noting how their relationship was intricately intertwined with duty and power. Rina stood motionless, watching from the sidelines, and Elfina noted with surprise that Roland was eating with effort, marveling at his ability to consume so much food. At the table, one of the men asked Eddie to bring another dish, and he obediently agreed. The other, leaning back in his chair, admiringly praised Rina for her outstanding skill, noting that he hadn't tasted anything so impressive in a long time. Alphina placed a plate of French toast and pudding on the table, explaining in detail what they were. One of the guests, surprised by the appearance, couldn't help but express admiration and admitted he'd never tasted anything like it in their world. Kane tried a piece and remarked on the soft texture, and Oscar, with undisguised delight, exclaimed that it was sweet and incredibly delicious. Everyone's faces reflected genuine amazement. The dish exceeded expectations. The servant handed the plate to the dark-haired man, who noted the sweet aroma but frowned slightly at the unfamiliar taste. The other two, however, happily praised the unusual combination, especially raving about how tender the eggs were. Roland couldn't resist breaking off a piece of cheese, curious about its origin. A blond man next to him sharply reprimanded him, reminding him of his work, but Roland calmly remarked that a little wine and dessert wouldn't hurt. However, the man sternly replied that duty was more important than taste. Roland then calmly addressed the young man, wanting his opinion. The man was confused, panicked, and tried to change the subject, but under Roland's intense gaze, he couldn't find the words. Mila washed the dishes with a smile, while someone panicked and called Rina for help. A scene of Mr. Abel happily tasting the dish flashed through her mind, and a hope arose that it might whet Prince Shuz's appetite. Rina thoughtfully surveyed the remaining portions of pudding and toast, admitting they were too few and she didn't have the energy to cook anymore. Then someone nearby asked what she was going to do with the uneaten pudding. Rina and Mila delightedly discussed the pudding's sweet and slightly bitter flavor, while Oscar marveled at how ordinary, stale bread had been transformed into an exquisite dessert. Kane happily agreed, adding that throwing away the carving shears had been the right decision. Suddenly, the girl excitedly asked what was going on when three men entered the room. One of them wearily said he was exhausted, while the other inhaled the scent and noticed a sweet odor. Mila ran up to Rina and curiously asked what she was holding. The chef explained that it was Rina's dish, prepared for His Highness Shuz, and Mila immediately exclaimed that she wanted to try it too. Unable to contain herself, Mila begged Rina to share at least a piece, insisting she'd never seen anything like it and had to try it. But Rina firmly replied that the workday was over and the kitchen was closed. The girl hesitantly asked if she should just make a cheese omelette, but before she could finish speaking, three people standing nearby simultaneously bowed and exclaimed her name, which stunned the silver-haired man nearby. Several people begged Rina to make them the same cheese omelettes, and the kitchen staff whispered her name like a mantra. She felt as if she were witnessing a new form of culinary worship. The girl hesitantly asked if she could stay, and the guy sitting nearby raised his eyebrows in surprise. She leaned forward, took a deep breath, and, accepting everything as it was, quietly agreed to stay. The girl then happily announced that she might finally have found a reason to stay, adding that a freezer would be a miracle. The two men at the table exchanged glances, trying to figure out what kind of device she was talking about. Kane, inspired by the idea, ordered Abel to immediately begin creating frozen desserts. Oscar suggested it was possible with the right ingredients, while Roland received a light slap on the head for overzealousness. The dark-haired man frowned and scolded the blonde man for the blow, calling him a moron. The blonde man, defending himself, explained that it wasn't him at all, but the conversation about frozen treats, after which the dark-haired man gently touched him on the head, and the blonde man smiled softly in response. Roland turned worriedly to Renee, warning her that she might have just made a mistake. In the background, Alphina chuckled softly, noticing that her little brother appeared to have broken something again. The boy called out for his older sister again and again, his voice growing increasingly anxious, as if desperately trying to get her attention. He wasn't going to give up until she answered. The short-haired girl turned to her older sister, asking if she was even listening as they sat in the back seat of the car. The older sister looked distracted, her gaze wandering off into the distance, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. The girl quietly apologized that she might have dozed off, and the boy quickly assured her that he had already apologized. The man behind the wheel smiled and remarked that his sister was tired after a long day at the beach and now deserved some rest. The girl timidly asked if the older woman could make omuresu when they returned home. The older woman smiled softly in response and, blushing slightly, promised that she would definitely do it for her. The children excitedly pointed to a convertible passing by and suggested they rent one next time. The man laughed and agreed, saying it would be nice to take a drive along the seaside on their next vacation. Underwater, the girl desperately tried to break free, experiencing searing pain and gasping for air. Her hand fell limply at her side as she reached for something at the last moment, trying to grasp at any chance of salvation. Suddenly, she inhaled sharply and opened her eyes, hearing the chirping of birds. Running her hand over her face, she quietly whispered that she hadn't had this dream in a long time, and briefly wondered why the memory of it still lingered. Now she smiled as she noted how accustomed she'd become to life in this world, and gratefully recalled the kindness of Lana, Monica, Anna, and Mr. Rick. A nearby boy responded with a curt okay, earning a light slap on the shoulder. The girl stretched, arms outstretched, enjoying the morning freshness after her run. She inhaled the scent of greenery deeply and thought how pleasant it was to live among such tranquility and pure nature. Then she frowned, glancing at her own status, which read healthy, but a bit plump. She admitted with a slight chuckle that it wasn't exactly pleasant, but despite all that, it was still fun to use this magic. Mila became intrigued by a new method for conserving magical energy, the technique of partial analysis, partial appraise. She was surprised to realize that she could now view only a portion of the information without expending unnecessary energy. The girl knelt in the forest and spotted ripe cocoa berries, deciding to pick some. She thought the magic bag would be her next useful acquisition, as she couldn't carry everything in her hands at once. Mila, with a sly smile, reminded Ed that they were in the girls' room. He, settling down on the couch, raised an eyebrow and dubiously asked what she meant, then simply listened without interrupting. Mila loudly accused Kane of smelling bad and sarcastically asked if he remembered to wash. Rena laughed from behind, and Oscar, trying to back him up, pointed out that she was simply teasing him without any malice. The silver-haired man smiled softly and said everything was fine, and the dark-haired girl sniffled. He added with a slight chuckle that she had clearly gotten too carried away, earning her a curious look. Rena felt her mood lighten in Ed's presence. She remembered how irritating he had been at first, but now she considered him a rather kind guy. Ed calmly remarked that his brother's permission was needed to create a religion. Mila asked him what he meant by the word creation, and Ed, grinning, reminded her that he heard at dinner yesterday that she had founded her own cult, obviously teasing her good-naturedly. The girl, her face cheerful, recalled the incident and was surprised she hadn't even noticed it happen. A friend standing nearby quietly laughed, glad Lana was happy when the maid called everyone back for pudding. Rena calmly sipped her tea, and Mila cheerfully reminded them to drink it while it was hot, adding that she had one more question. Roland, watching them, noticed how quickly the prince's mood changed and chuckled softly. A cheerful girl showed off a bag filled with cocoa berries she'd found on the street. 3 onlookers exchanged surprised glances, amazed by her find, and began asking her where exactly she'd found them. Mila explained with a smile that it would be foolish not to pick the ripe berries, as they would simply fall to the ground in vain. However, the boy remarked with displeasure that the berries were too sour, and the girl standing nearby agreed, admitting that she disliked them for the same reason. Rina happily retorted that the berries were indeed sweet and delicious, despite their darkened skin. Hearing this, the 2 maids anxiously asked if she'd eaten overripe or even spoiled fruit, doubting their freshness. Then Rina invited the others to try the berries. The girls, having tasted them, happily confirmed that the flavor was indeed sweet and rich, and the guy, smiling, encouraged them, saying that now everyone should try at least one. The girl with wavy dark blue hair mused about the rare ability to determine taste through magical evaluation of food. The silver-haired man explained that such detailed magic was rare, and the blonde remembered her grandmother's words about ripeness being the sign of true taste. The dark-haired girl remarked that some people prefer sourness, as everyone has different tastes. In response, the blonde girl enthusiastically declared that her method of tasting was the most correct, which genuinely surprised the third participant. Kane asked why Rina added black tea, and she explained that she was making a fruit infusion, believing the tart flavor paired perfectly with sweet desserts like cakes or ice cream. Mila, smiling cheerfully, said that black tea should be brewed in a teapot with fruit, but even the simpler version was delicious. Rina, inhaling the aroma, noted that the scent of cocoa berries in the tea made it especially appetizing. Rina hesitantly asked if it was tasty, and Mila excitedly inquired about jam. Another girl explained that tea with jam is sweeter and richer, comparing it to fruit simmered with sugar. The cheerful girl happily declared she wanted to try it, but was gently warned that the jam itself wasn't always delicious and that it all depended on preference. She then turned to Monica, asking if she'd drifted away from the conversation. Kane suggested they cook something anyway, since everyone was interested, and Rina looked up in surprise. When he teased her with a smirk for her slowness, she apologized for her rudeness, but he smiled and noted that it was too late to justify himself. Kane admitted he wouldn't mind spending time with Rina, and Mila shyly thanked him for his kindness. Rina, standing nearby, watched them silently, feeling a slight but pleasant warmth inside. Rina, rummaging through her things, spoke to the girl with the hair clip, saying she had to give her something before she forgot. She looked up in surprise, not understanding what she was talking about. Ed handed the magical bag to the girl with a joyful smile, and she, stunned, accepted the gift gratefully, almost jumping with delight. The boy nodded shyly, feeling his heart beat faster, and smiled back. One girl excitedly asked if she could use the item right away. Another explained that her brother had registered the bag in her name in advance, but didn't say how, adding that some secrets were best kept secret. Rina excitedly asked if her new dress suited her. The 2 girls happily agreed, and the silver-haired man, coughing sheepishly, admitted that it suited her very well, adding with a slight smile that she was truly attractive. Rina looked thoughtfully at the magical bag and, with a smile, called it Apsy Daisy. The girl next to her asked, confused, why that name, unsure how to react to such a cheerful nickname. Mila sighed and suggested that perhaps some people should just keep quiet. Rina asked curiously why this concerned Ed, and Mila suddenly realized she'd completely forgotten the main point of the conversation. Then Kane excitedly announced that they'd finally built a refrigerator, reminding Renee of how she'd talked about its usefulness the day before. She was surprised, but soon smiled, admitting it was indeed a great idea. The twin-tailed girl teased the silver-haired boy, noticing his confused expression. He sheepishly admitted that he'd only been told about it that morning and had almost forgotten, while the other 2 girls gasped in surprise. The young man explained that the country's prime minister had summoned him to discuss business, so he invited the girl in. She was surprised that, despite the importance of the meeting, they calmly sipped black tea and chatted, as if it were an ordinary tea party. Rina stubbornly refused to go, admitting she had a bad feeling. Another girl insistently urged her on, but the smiling woman calmly explained that they needed to head to where the king and his highness Shuzel were waiting. Rina moved forward with difficulty, complaining that her body felt like lead and wouldn't obey. Mila, visibly agitated, urged her to hurry, while behind them, everyone watched their steps tensely, sensing a sense of unease. The girl with the ribbon on her head cried out in frustration, admitting that things weren't quite as fun as she'd expected. In the background, the majestic castle stood silently, as if observing their inner turmoil. The dark blue-haired girl awkwardly mumbled that she wanted to go back, complaining of a stomach ache, but the maid behind her firmly insisted that they still had to enter the dining hall despite her protests. Kane greeted Rina warmly, saying they'd been waiting for her for a long time. She offered a tight smile and apologized for being late, though deep down she wished she hadn't come at all. Rina reminded them that they themselves had been called in early, and someone had noted the presence of Messrs. Tal and Abel. Another added that everyone looked gloomy, as if expecting something unpleasant. Then Rina proudly showed the refrigerator to the assembled group, declaring that this was precisely what they were talking about. But those present exchanged ambiguous glances, whispering to each other about the hidden meaning of what was happening. Kane perked up and asked if they could now make frozen desserts. Rina sheepishly thanked him for his interest, while the others chatted with curiosity and slight irritation, discussing their newfound knowledge about ice cream. Kane calmly explained that even though the refrigerator was ready, it wasn't possible to make ice cream right away. Mila, surprised, countered that everything should be ready instantly, but quickly realized the process took time. Rina assumed that the two princes would have everything finished by dinner, and a discussion began between the cooks and servants about how much work went into such a task and how much easier it would be to have a special ice cream machine. Rina listened quietly while the others marveled at the magical devices. One remarked that magic and artifacts were far more convenient than any tools, while another couldn't hide his amazement as he spoke of the strange wonders of her home country. The girl suggested speeding up the process with magic, admitting the pressure was too great. Then someone thoughtfully asked what exactly was missing, mentioning the need for someone capable of using ice magic for at least half an hour straight. Kane confidently declared he would bring the right people, imagining how his strong hands would help the cause. Mila stood by the window, watching him with a thoughtful, almost gentle expression. The girl anxiously asked Ed what she should do with Pandora's box. He calmly asked if she was talking about herself, and someone's voice, with a chuckle, suggested that she seemed to have opened Sh's own box. Roland showed up ahead of schedule, announcing he'd brought someone to see Renee. She cautiously asked why he'd come unannounced, and the guards standing nearby exchanged glances, startled by the sudden visit. Rina anxiously asked why the Emperor was involved in all this, but the dark-haired man called out sharply to the confused Mila, demanding her attention. His voice echoed throughout the hall, causing silence. The girl, smiling good-naturedly, demanded to find someone with strong arms, while the dark-haired man angrily cursed the Prime Minister, calling him an idiot and asking why he had chosen the Emperor. A young woman standing nearby giggled derisively. Roland cleared his throat and, as if proud, declared that Felix possessed the strongest arms in the country. Mila nervously addressed him as Your Majesty Felix, while Oscar stood behind, watching silently and warily. Roland impatiently demanded to get to the point, and the girl quickly apologized for the early meeting, feeling awkward under his gaze. He cut her off mid-sentence, demanding to speak directly. The girl, her expression composed, explained that she'd received a refrigerator designed for making ice cream, but it would take time. Someone nearby remarked that they also needed a strong-armed cold mage, and the Prime Minister overheard the conversation. The girl excitedly announced that she had brought the man with the strongest arms in the entire kingdom, addressing His Majesty Felix and emphasizing that she was doing so at his personal request. Her eyes sparkled with determination, and her voice was confident. Roland called out to Shuz, who responded hesitantly, as if unsure of the reason for interfering. Then another man remarked that there was no need to rush, suggesting they proceed calmly and without undue haste. Roland playfully patted Elfina on the shoulder, causing her to turn and ask Rina what to do next. Mila watched with interest, mentally comparing the two to a comedy royalty whose scenes could be watched endlessly. Rina laughed, saying the sound of the blow was so funny it was impossible to contain. The other girl explained that it wasn't that made her laugh, but how gracefully he ignored the other person, as if they didn't even exist. Roland grinned slyly, as if he'd grasped the true nature of the man before him. Rina apologized to Ed for her earlier words, and the others watched this brief scene with faint smiles, finding their interaction amusing. The dark-haired man was surprised by Rina's sudden politeness and asked, narrowing his eyes, why her tone. The girl bowed and sincerely apologized to the emperor, while the silver-haired man next to her wondered if he really wasn't angry. Roland, with a serious expression, demanded that everyone smile, adding that he was actually a very kind person. Rina blinked in confusion, deciding that such self-confidence sounded brash and almost defiant. Roland laughed loudly, calling the girl a sly cat in sheep's clothing. She was amazed, and those around her looked at her curiously, agreeing that there was indeed something special and amusing about her. The group moved to the dining room, where the girl joyfully announced she was about to start making ice cream. The blonde clapped her hands in delight, while the others watched with interest and anticipation. Kane chuckled, saying he didn't expect to hear them considered a nuisance. He then asked about the expression sheep's clothing, and Mila, laughing, explained that they were in the cook's way and suggested they all move to the dining room. Oscar quietly enjoyed the cheerful bustle. The girl explained that milk, sugar, and eggs had already been added to the cauldron, and then asked the two men to hold it with gloves to prevent their hands from getting frostbite while the mixture cooled and stirred. Kane asked Rina if he could use ice magic, and she confirmed it, adding that the cooling should be gradual. Everyone around him watched intently as he carefully directed the flow of cold toward the walls of the vessel. Alphina set the example by using a special magical technique to slowly cool the mixture, astonishing everyone present. The modest young man awkwardly apologized to King Felix and asked permission to stir it carefully. Rina quickly ordered about 10 centimeters of oil to be heated in a small saucepan, but the girl realized that she would have to act differently. The man she addressed completely ignored her words, watching only for her reaction. The girl angrily accused the boy of allegedly intending to pour boiling oil on Fell's older brother. He began to frighteningly defend himself, and another participant in the scene sternly scolded him for such thoughts, reminding him that he was a prince. Ed mumbled an embarrassed excuse, but the girl gently reassured him, apologizing and promising to make him some salted carriage. He smiled awkwardly and admitted that he actually liked chicken, despite his protests. Rina cheerfully chimed in with the others while Mila asked for someone to complain about their brother. Then Roland thoughtfully asked what to do about the brothers Fell and Shuz being left idle, and the discussion smoothly devolved into friendly laughter. In the kitchen, the girl asked the cook about salted carriage, and he explained that it was fried chicken with a slightly salty flavor. The boy followed her silently, and she thoughtfully wondered if the oil would make the dish too greasy. Everyone listened attentively as someone described the chicken: crispy skin, juicy meat, simply perfection. Two girls happily added that both adults and children adore this dish and expressed their impatience to try it. Shuzul suddenly appeared behind Rina as she was frying a flour-dredged chicken. She winced and asked him not to startle her while she worked with the oil, the golden carriage crackling merrily in the pan. Rina demonstrated how to fry the dish properly, explaining that for a perfectly crispy crust, you need to fry it twice. Kane eagerly asked if it was ready, and she smiled and handed him the plate, proudly presenting the result. A close-up shot of crispy chicken gleamed, held between chopsticks. Someone's hand explained that salt could be rubbed directly into the meat or added to the batter, ensuring the inside remained juicy and tender, preserving the aroma of fresh butter. Mila joyfully offered Ed a piece and, laughing, told him to open his mouth. The other two watched this scene in surprise when a loud pop sounded off to the side, making everyone jump. Eddie devoured the piece with gusto and, beaming, praised the taste, calling it incredible, crunchy on the outside, juicy meat on the inside. One of the people watching thought, smiling, that this guy was just too charming. Shuzul suddenly smiled and offered the dish to the others, which confused the two girls. They exchanged glances, deciding the brothers were apparently deliberately trying to be cute. Everyone around them began to whisper about his unexpected interest in food. Mila, beaming, asked what to do with the leftovers, to which Rina replied that they should be served to His Majesty first. The young man next to her remarked with surprise at how delicious the meat was. Mila cheerfully handed the treat to Mr. Abel and Mr. Tal, wondering how she could use Emperor Felix's love of meat and ice cream as bait. The others watched from afar, suppressing smiles. The girl playfully offered to let someone taste the food for poison after the two princes had already finished eating. The others awkwardly thanked her for the treat, exchanging glances of surprise and slight unease. Roland informed the king that the poison test was complete and presented the dish. The monarch recalled with a slight chuckle that his younger brothers had participated in the test, and Mila happily remarked on how delicious the dish had turned out. Roland noticed someone had already finished eating and inquired about their impressions. Then, with a chuckle, he muttered that he wondered when the man would find his sheep's clothing again. The girl, confused, asked, "Really?" Kane countered that the sheepskin had long since disappeared, and Oscar explained that someone had taken it even earlier. Mila quietly whispered that it had definitely been done on purpose and looked away guiltily. Two maids argued that Rina had deliberately given him less to force him to help with the ice cream. One of them playfully slammed the lid of the pot, offering more, and Roland grinned slyly, anticipating what would happen next. Rina irritably demanded that the boy hurry up and finally do the right thing. He sighed inwardly, wondering what had been wrong with him lately, and from behind him, a girl's anxious voice called his name. Roland abruptly ended the conversation, chiding everyone for disturbing the work during the midday hour. Rina, composing herself, firmly declared that this time she intended to speak frankly. She shouted that everyone was just getting in the way, causing confusion and irritation among those present. The cooks, in a panic, explained that Mr. Rick and the others were afraid to return to work, even though lunch was just around the corner. The dark-haired man coldly repeated that everything around him was a nuisance. Behind him, a girl screamed in fear, and Rina, feeling dizzy, wondered if she'd said too much. The others looked at her with alarm and surprise. The girl realized with horror that she had likely offended the emperor himself. The man behind her chuckled and again called her annoying and intrusive, as if deliberately adding fuel to the fire. Rina, feeling broken, whispered that it was over. Two girls nearby apologized for not being able to help her, and one guy sighed heavily, while another tried to address the dark-haired man but faltered. Roland suddenly laughed softly, finding the whole thing amusing. Mila stared at him in surprise, not believing he was actually laughing after such a tense scene. Roland coldly warned the girl that in their country, disrespect for the emperor was punishable by death. He asked her with a smirk whether she possessed courage or simply stupidity, and she, turning pale, hastily apologized, almost losing her voice. Roland gently patted the girl on the head, remarking with a kind smile that some people were overly impulsive, and therefore caution was advised. His tone was calm, but his words held a quiet warning. Roland turned away, and the girl, blushing, thought with surprise that she almost lost her balance from surprise. Emperor Felix suddenly laughed, and for the first time a warm, almost affectionate smile appeared on his face. Roland turned sharply on the man, accusing him of pretending to scold Rina and then simply running away. Rina looked up in surprise, and behind her stood a smiling man, watching the scene with interest. Roland turned away with an irritated click of his tongue, and Oscar lazily offered them some ice cream. Mila realized this was just an excuse to leave, and she frowned and called out to him, feeling irritated. Rina, holding a wooden spoon, cheerfully offered the emperor a taste of the dish. He remained silent, his expression sullen, but she cried out joyfully anyway, thinking she had won the silent stare-off. A girl with a flower hairclip waited impatiently for her ice cream, while two cloaked figures hurried everyone to finish their work. Behind them, a small group watched in confusion, not fully understanding what was happening. Kane asked what to do next, simultaneously praising someone for their efforts. The entire group, including the girl with the flower hairpin, gathered around the pot, from which thick steam rose, and listened to his instructions. Everyone crowded around the table, where one participant ordered the cream to be stirred continuously until it thickened. Another dubiously asked how long it would take, and a third reminded them that they had discussed this before, but no one had listened. Kane encouraged everyone, cheerfully switching roles, but Roland grumbled discontentedly about his lack of dexterity. He suggested mixing the ingredients himself, while simultaneously cooling them, to at least keep his hands occupied. Rina was urged to act quickly as the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The two men exchanged caustic comments about magic and prudence, after which one chuckled and ordered the group to stop dawdling and get down to business. Roland sharply reprimanded the surprised youth, declaring that the Prime Minister should be helping the Emperor, not putting a spoke in his wheel. The young man, turning pale, hastily apologized, admitting his own guilt. Two soldiers attempted to detain the man who had fled with the Emperor, but a cheerful girl intervened, asking everyone to calm down, assuring them that dinner would be ready very soon. Mila calmly asked Felix to slowly stir the mixture with a wooden spatula, while instructing Abel and Tal to bring a cylindrical container, and ordered Shizzle to continue cooling as before. The soldiers loudly complained of fatigue and hunger, until one of them collapsed from the noise. Outside the kitchen, a man mockingly told a woman that her birth was a waste, to which she calmly replied that she had long been accustomed to such remarks. The cheerful girl noticed that the mixture had become significantly thicker, and those around her looked at each other in surprise, wondering why His Majesty and all the nobility had gathered here and what exactly they were doing. The girl delightedly sampled the fresh, homemade ice cream, marveling at its rich flavor and creamy texture. The man next to her nodded approvingly, saying it was truly excellent, and offered to make another serving. Mila enthusiastically offered to have lunch with everyone, surprising Kane, who was hesitant to try. She cheerfully assured him that she would take responsibility, and Roland jokingly called her old lady, to which she responded cheerfully, sighing loudly and smiling. The girl cheerfully asked for some carriage, insisting it was delicious. The dark-haired man asked with a grin what she would make for him if she stopped frying, and she worriedly admitted that there was almost no meat left. The girl happily agreed to entrust the tasting to Renee, and the others behind her perked up, preparing to sample the treat. The aroma of food and a shared sense of anticipation filled the air. Everyone admired the consommé, and one of the chefs remarked that it was truly masterful. The chef invited everyone to try it, and as soon as they took a spoonful, someone exclaimed in delight, admiring the taste. The girl enthusiastically praised the taste of the carriage, but the guy sternly declared there would be no more. Then she called out to Rina, who, wiping her hands, replied that she had just finished eating and asked them to wait a bit. Rina and Kane gazed admiringly at the perfectly prepared ice cream, hesitant to ruin such beauty just to try it. Roland thanked Rina, and Mila suggested making carriage and cheese crisps, knowing the king didn't like sweets. The cheerful girl enthusiastically praised Rina's dessert, urging her to eat it before it melted. Meanwhile, the man in the cloak quietly told Abel that it was time for them to leave, as the work wasn't finished yet, and he leisurely left the room. She happily remarked that the dessert was cold, sweet and delicious, and he asked with interest whether those black specks were cuckooberries, both of them completely absorbed in their delicacy. Rina tried the jam and was surprised by its balance of sweetness and tartness. The dark-haired man explained that it was made from cucumberries, which surprised her, as she had always thought cucumberries were exclusively sour. Mila offered everyone a cup of cuckooberry-flavored tea with a smile, explaining that she'd brewed it in advance. The others commented on the pleasant aroma and sweet flavor, and some noticed subtle apple notes in the black tea. The girl blushed when the young man noticed the scent had improved considerably and offered to make the same tea for dinner. He smiled back, and she sighed inwardly, thinking about how troublesome her brothers were. Rina looked thoughtfully at her hand and, with a hint of weariness, admitted that she'd been working all day and expected to lose at least a little weight. Mila asked curiously why she was looking at her palms so closely. The group discussed how impressive Rina had been earlier. One recalled how she seemed almost a threat to the emperor, while others admitted they'd been afraid for her back then, but now felt relieved. Monica greeted Rina cheerfully, but she replied that there was no ice cream left for her. The girl shyly admitted that she would still like to try some, but Rina hesitated, unsure of what to say. Mila enthusiastically declared that she wanted to try something too. Then Rina thoughtfully asked everyone how they would react if someone ate the ice cream without permission, carefully observing their reactions. The three maids reacted with dismay to the rude threat uttered by the unseen interlocutor. Then the smiling woman calmly asked who exactly had made the ice cream, and her question immediately attracted the attention of a serious-looking man nearby. The girl with a ribbon in her hair looked thoughtfully out the window at the two moons shining side by side in the starry sky, wondering how much brighter the stars were here than in her old world. The silver-haired boy remembered how, as a child, he'd thought his older brother had smashed the moon with his fist, but now he only found the differences between worlds amusing. Someone nearby chuckled softly as he listened to this story. The girl thanked Ed for calling her from the windowsill. Ed, with a slight smile, noted that now every day seems rich and joyful, because he always has people around to support him. The girl reflected on how she had been summoned into this world as a saint, but was soon declared a mistake, leaving her without a way home. Two maids and a young man discussed the hopelessly poor local cuisine and how everyone had unexpectedly enjoyed it. Rina happily announced that she had received official permission to freely use the pantry's supplies. This delighted the girl with the hairclip, while another expressed gratitude for the improved taste of the food thanks to Rina. The young man, entering the kitchen, was surprised by the number of people crowded around the tables and said doubtfully that it seemed too crowded here today. Mila excitedly asked what they were cooking today, surrounded by a whole crowd of cooks from the army and the magic department. They all promised to do their best not to interfere with the process and simply observe. The girl thought about what kind of soup she should make this time, deciding that the menu needed to change every day, because people would quickly get tired of the two types she made before. Mila marveled at how clean and abundant the royal pantry was, not hiding her delight. Rina calmly explained that their empire had almost no green vegetables, but an abundance of root vegetables, potatoes, carrots, and turnips. Rina added that they had some seafood and dairy cows, but most of the pigs had long since been destroyed by monsters. The girl listening to the story frowned anxiously, learning about the monsters living nearby. Mila looked at the different types of flour with interest and asked how wheat flour differed from others. The girl with the hairclip explained that all wheat flour is called that, and the difference lies only in its intended use for bread, baked goods, or desserts. Rina admitted to possessing the ability to judge, surprising everyone present. They watched in amazement as she determined the quality of flour with just a glance at the sack, and listened attentively to her explanations at the market. When asked what she saw, Lana became confused. The others reminded her that she, too, had the gift of appraisal, but it worked differently and, unfortunately, wasn't very useful around the house. The girl guessed that Lana must have seen her weight and measurements, since the clothes fit perfectly. At that moment, someone suggested making potato and onion soup, and the group unanimously agreed. The cheerful girl asked how many people were on shift today. The boss, composing himself, replied 28, but she corrected him, 30, if you count Lana and Monica. After that, they calculated the portions, 600 divided by 30, 20 per person. The cook nervously remarked that cutting 600 pieces would be difficult, but Rina insisted that's how many were needed for the entire palace. The girls, encouraging each other, volunteered to help in the kitchen, especially when they heard the promise of a reward. Rina and Mila exchanged a dubious glance, and Rina admitted she'd never used them against anyone. Then Mila's small, worried projection asked if it was really worth trying such a risky idea. Lana wondered if she could crush an onion, much to the surprise of a maid who didn't understand what that meant. Another figured she could gather about 10 available maids to help. 2 maids were happily encouraging each other, hurrying to collect the cuckooberries for a reward, and the third, cheerfully waving her hand, thought that the word encouragement sounded too tempting. One man asked Rina what to do now that there were fewer people. She suggested dividing into 3 teams and having an onion chopping competition. The others enthusiastically agreed, deciding it would be more fun than regular work. It was announced that each team would receive 200 onions, the winners would receive crepes with ice cream, and the losers would be punished. This immediately stirred everyone's excitement and transformed the kitchen into a noisy waiting area. Rick's team, Mateus and Lutz's team, and the new recruits from the military magic department entered a culinary battle. At stake were those very same ice cream crepes, which had made all this effort worthwhile. 2 young cooks writhed in pain from their eyes and noses as they chopped countless onions. The girl suggested making the crepes, while the other suggested waiting for the soup to finally be ready. The cheerful guy happily agreed to wait in the dining room, and the girl next to him thought with a smile that Ed was incredibly sweet. Another woman standing nearby hesitated, dreaming of having 2 dishes at once. The girl noted that he could be cheeky at times, but he tried his best to keep up with his older brothers. After some thought, she resolutely set about making the crepe. Mila explained that the crepe dough is made from cake flour, eggs, milk, sugar, salt, and butter. She added that using bread flour and omitting the eggs will result in a denser and more unique texture. She added that since Ed was trying it for the first time, she would follow the classic recipe. She also noted that a little rum would add a special flavor, and ordered him to cover the dough with a towel and put it in the refrigerator to make the apple compote. Sous-chef Mateus and Lutz's team joyfully celebrated their victory, loud cheers, laughter, and applause erupted. Everyone was smiling, proud of their combined efforts to win the competition. The girl happily congratulated the boy on how thinly and accurately he'd sliced the ingredients. He delightedly declared that they were definitely going to get a reward, while the other young man beamed and added that he was most looking forward to the ice cream treat. Rick sheepishly admitted he felt guilty for the failure, despite trying his best, but the others hastened to assure him it wasn't his fault. Behind them, the cheers and applause of the winners could already be heard. The girl cleared her throat hesitantly and solemnly announced that the losers would be punished. The two men behind them exchanged serious glances, sensing something difficult was about to happen. Mila cheerfully ordered that the entire sliced onion be fried over low heat until richly brown, emphasizing that the main thing was not to let it burn. The cooks looked at each other in disbelief, unable to believe that such a task would only take 1 or 2 hours with 600 onions. The girl simply smiled and wished everyone patience, happy that her team had won. Mila apologized with a smile for the wait and handed Ed the finished crepe. He delightedly remarked on how delicious it looked and sincerely thanked her for the treat. The girl asked everyone to return to their work, explaining that it was difficult to eat under the gaze of others. Curious onlookers crowded behind her, and the prize for the winning team was already waiting to the side. A crepe adorned with milk ice cream, apple compote, and cocoberry jam graced the table. The girl, upon tasting it, exclaimed with delight, amazed by its delicate flavor. Mila happily suggested crepes with compote, noting that they went perfectly together, and Rina added that she would prepare a portion for His Highness Shuzel and hopefully noted that he might like it. The young chef exclaimed admiringly that the ice cream was surprisingly delicious, and wondered if cocoberries were really that sweet. A silver-haired man nearby whistled softly, and the dark-haired advisor wondered why everyone was already eating without permission. The maids excitedly reminded her about the due reward, but Rina sheepishly apologized, admitting she'd completely forgotten, and promised to get everything ready quickly. One maid even shed tears as she scolded her for her forgetfulness. Mila asked if all the berries were cocoberries, and another girl, holding a huge bag, confirmed that they had picked both red and black ones. The blonde girl admired the soft texture of the dough, amazed that the crepe could be held in her hands. Two maids behind her watched her sincere reaction with smiles. Mila carefully tasted her crepe and, enjoying it, noted that the dough was soft and melting, and the sweet and sour flavors were perfectly balanced. She happily thought this little roll was a true culinary achievement. The girls excitedly discussed the surprisingly pleasant taste of the cocoberries, their previous sourness forgotten. One of them chuckled sheepishly when someone compared the berries to birdseed. The entire team joyfully celebrated their success, exchanging tired but happy glances. Someone asked with relief if they were finally out of onions, while another wondered what to do with the diminishing supply of food. Mila tasked everyone with peeling potatoes, explaining that half would go into the chicken consommé for the onion soup, and the rest would go into the potato puree. The two men exchanged glances, sensing that there would be a lot of work. The girl enthusiastically suggested starting with 300 tubers, and the two cooks nodded without arguing. One of the assistants told everyone to get ready for the soup, and the chef sighed heavily, realizing the enormity of the task. Lana excitedly declared that they weren't skipping work at all. Monica and the other maid exchanged glances, surprised by her determination, as they both knew perfectly well that no one wanted to return to work. Rina looked in surprise at the two maids, who happily admitted they couldn't wait to see what she'd cook next. One of them added, with a serious expression, that she was genuinely interested in every dish she made. The girl cheerfully suggested they start making soft and airy bread, and the other two immediately responded with joy. The camera zoomed in, revealing a hand thoughtfully reaching for a glass jar. Rina, holding a jar, reflected on how her passion for cooking in this world began with homesickness. A man nearby asked if he could watch the process, and a cheerful girl listened intently to the conversation. Rina, with a confident smile, invited everyone to watch her bake bread. The crowd of cooks murmured, questioning her odd comparison of soft bread to apples and water, but one man calmly said he'd return to making soup. The man carefully examined the porous apples and suggested that a yeast fungus might be the cause. The two girls exchanged glances, expressing doubt and slight concern about the reliability of this explanation. Mila explained how to mix bread flour, salt, sugar, and natural yeast, then energetically began kneading the dough. He watched, noticing how it softened, and she confidently assured him that with time, the dough would become perfect. Rina stepped aside, and the chef asked worriedly if she was going to bake the bread without removing the tea towel. She replied that she'd let the dough ferment, adding thoughtfully whether the expression's secret of life was too strong. Mila jokingly asked Ed if he'd had time to eat, and he cheerfully replied that he had, and that the food was excellent. Rina, standing nearby, smiled softly, delighted by his good mood. The girl asked him what he was doing with the dough, and he calmly replied that he was baking bread. The other two began talking animatedly about the fermentation process, which would take a long time, expecting a soft result. Roland noted with irritation that his efforts were still insufficient. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Mila informed Renee that a message had arrived from her older brother, Fel, surprising her. It was rare for the emperor to write directly. They also discussed the differences in how dough ferments. Roland complained angrily that it was all gone, and the girl nodded quietly in agreement. The boy next to him explained that the amount given out had indeed not been enough for everyone. Rina's friends marveled at the reward she would receive for her delicious dishes, advising her to ask for what she truly wanted. She thought she might wish for something simple but as enjoyable as good food. After some thought, she said she would like a bathtub in her room, a large one so she could soak in hot water and completely relax. Mila threw up her hands and loudly declared that bathing was absolutely necessary, complaining that without it, she didn't feel completely clean. Rina asked with slight disbelief if it was really that important, and the others exchanged surprised glances. Mila animatedly explained that hot water helps relieve fatigue and restore strength. Rina listened with interest until a cheerful young man suggested creating a bath using magic, causing Mila to cry out joyfully. Mila spoke passionately about the benefits of warm baths, from muscle pain to overall relaxation. Rina listened in amazement, and Mila jokingly added that she wasn't yet at risk of nerve pain, as she was still young. The girl suggested placing the bath somewhere near the military building, as many people there need to rest after training. The younger woman nodded, considering the idea thoughtfully. When asked where exactly to build, the girl pointed to a place near the wall, but the guy asked to move a little further, agreeing that it would be better not to occupy the middle of the hall. The silver-haired man asked if everything was going according to plan, and the girl standing behind him thought with surprise that a different arrangement could have been chosen, but remained silent. Mila enthusiastically called Ed a genius and the best of the best. He looked embarrassed and waved his hand dismissively, and she, slightly taken aback, admitted that she still struggled to express admiration with restraint. Kane asked Ed if he went to school and whether it would change his personality. Ed, sitting on the floor, frankly admitted that they didn't teach him much at school and that he was essentially on a long vacation. Mila greeted Rina cheerfully, but she quietly admitted she hadn't said anything special. The cook was surprised by her sudden return, and the girl herself thought that with him around, everything was much more interesting than she had expected. Mila reported that the potatoes were already boiled and mashed, after which Rina explained how wheat flour is added to fried onions for bechamel sauce. The cook noted that the consistency of such a sauce depends on what it's being used for. She was advised to add a little oil, as the sauce still had a grainy texture. The two cooks discussed the process: fry the onions until soft, then gradually add the milk, and then mix the potatoes, milk, and bechamel sauce into a single mass. The potage parmentier soup was finally ready. One of the chefs praised Rina's skill, while another suggested using other vegetables instead of potatoes. The man in the culinary had softly called the girl's name, and she replied with a smile that she admired Rick and the others for their ability to master new dishes without neglecting their main duties. In the kitchen, the cook thanked Rina, and she laughingly admitted she'd completely forgotten about the bread. A boy peered out of the oven, and a girl nearby thoughtfully remarked that, despite his age, Mr. Rick had a certain charm about him. Mila watched with rapture as the dough rose, trembling slightly as it fermented. She explained how to carefully knead the dough and divide it into 6 equal parts, while a cheerful observer nearby watched the process with interest. Mila told Ed to wash his hands so he could knead his own portion of dough. When she invited Mr. Rick to join in, he happily agreed, and Ed began kneading the soft dough with care and diligence. Rina was surprised to notice how elastic and tender the dough had become, and the chef explained that it needed a second fermentation. Meanwhile, Mila joyfully held the tray, watching as the rolled dough was placed on the hot plate. Mila enthusiastically offered to try the freshly baked bread, even though it was still hot. Rina hesitantly asked if she could eat it right away, but the smell was too enticing to resist. The company noticed they were being watched from under the archway. Someone offered to butter their bread, while another playfully tapped the prince on the shoulder, daring him to be bolder, while calling him a fool with a smile. Rina handed Ed a freshly baked slice, and he warmly praised its softness, crisp crust, and airy texture. Then she understood why he'd been so interested in the taste of bread earlier. He examined the slice carefully, noting the contrast between the crispy crust and the soft center, drenched in melted butter. He silently confessed that he had never eaten anything so perfect before. A young man with silver hair, flushed with fatigue, said thoughtfully that up until that moment he'd only eaten stones. He held 2 hot, golden pieces of bread in his hands. Mila excitedly declared that she would bake Ed the most delicious bread in the world. He was surprised, and Rina cheerfully supported her, adding that she wanted to try the best bread herself. Everyone happily followed suit. The girl excitedly announced a new contest called Grand Prix, whoever you want to feed, holding a loaf of bread in her hands. The crowd around her burst into a murmur, exchanging glances of surprise and interest. Mila cheerfully asked if everyone was ready and explained the rules. On the pieces of paper you were given, you had to write the name of the person you wanted to give the bread to, and then put the paper in the box she was holding. The 2 cooks chuckled, noting that if someone who wanted to eat could write, they would each write themselves. Nearby, 2 maids whispered, trying to guess who would win. One of the girls thoughtfully said that the winner would be the one who got the best piece. She reminded everyone not to write their name, as otherwise they would be instantly eliminated. The warm bread was sliced diagonally into 5 pieces, and the bacon was carefully cut into small pieces. Someone exclaimed joyfully, recognizing the familiar aroma, while another confirmed with a smile, yes, it really was bacon. The stage shows the process of making bacon and cheese bread. Slices are placed on a baking sheet, topped with cheese, then bacon is added, and the bread is baked until the cheese melts. When the aroma fills the kitchen, someone joyfully announces that the best bread is ready. The girl suggests not waiting for anyone and starting eating right away, explaining that the cheese will harden if not eaten hot. 3 chefs look at her reproachfully, but one quietly thanks her for the food, unable to resist temptation. Rina enjoys her dish with gusto, asking the others to wait while she finishes. Kane and Mila urge her to start voting, and Kane half-jokingly remarks that she has amazing willpower to be able to eat under such pressure. The man in the chef's hat took a greedy bite of the sandwich and noted with satisfaction that the bread was soft, the bacon was aromatic, and the melted cheese gave the dish a rich flavor. Rina smiled and congratulated Rick and Mateus on their success. Behind her, the 2 chefs discussed how similar ideas led to a desire to feed their colleagues. The rest of the room silently savored the fragrant bread, not arguing with their victory. The girl desperately cried out why no one had voted for her, since she was the one who was most hungry. Then, almost in tears, she turned to Renee, asking her to cook something. Someone calmly noted that Anna and the others had also participated in the competition. Mila yelled angrily at Rina, but Rina frowned and irritably replied that she wouldn't cook anything. The girl ordered her to shut up, causing Mila to cry out as if she'd been burned by her words. Lotta ate her snack with pleasure, and Rick, watching, sighed with weariness. After all, just recently he had been happy that he had treated her, and now she was calmly finishing the leftovers. 2 women started talking about how lucky Lana was. Her husband's bread was similar to the bread she made herself. This surprised the listener, who was learning for the first time that Rick and Lana were married. A man nearby thanked Lana for the healing potatoes. Kane sipped his blueberry tea leisurely and noticed the taste had become especially pleasant. Rina smiled and said he'd gotten used to it and was eating breakfast with her just like at home, to which he replied that he'd gotten used to it a long time ago. The girl happily noted that she hadn't eaten breakfast separately today, as she was eating with him. He asked her which she preferred, blueberries or apples, and she froze for a second, deciding his question sounded too cute. She suggested making baked apples next time, since he'd enjoyed the apple compote. He was surprised, as he didn't actually like apples, but he found the compote and blueberries surprisingly delicious. Rina began explaining the recipe, lending it an almost poetic quality. The girl next to her asked if she could put it more simply, and the others listened with interest, holding apples against the kitchen light. The girl with the boss seriously stated that there was no need to attach unnecessary pathos to every title, and the guy with blonde hair added that there was no need to address people with excessive titles either. A tired Rina sluggishly bit into an apple while everyone around her discussed her behavior. Someone remarked that Lana had recently scolded her, while another asked with a smirk what she was doing. Mila solemnly announced that she would now prepare a magnificent baked apple, curtsied and smiled with pride, causing surprise and curiosity in everyone present. The girl gracefully ordered the sugar and butter to be added to the sparkling bowl, stirring them with grace and reverence. The two cooks exchanged glances, barely suppressing smiles at her theatrical expressions. She carefully removed the core from the magnificent apple and carefully placed the sugar and butter mixture inside, commenting on the importance of doing so with respect. A man nearby muttered quietly that he didn't understand to whom exactly she had just apologized. Rina carefully placed the apples in the oven and explained that they needed 20 minutes, despite the busy kitchen schedule. The young man chuckled softly, finding her thoughtful words unexpectedly touching. Mila cheerfully asked if the baking method seemed too simple, but the three chefs in the background looked at each other in confusion, completely at a loss as to how to replicate the recipe. Rina, Mila, and Elfina enthusiastically discussed the magnificent baked apples, calling them delicious, sweet, and surprisingly easy to prepare. Their joyful voices filled the kitchen, and soon the trio were laughing, enjoying the moment of carefree warmth. Afterwards, Rina admitted that she didn't like baked apples at all, which drew loud laughter from the others. They were amazed at how she could so skillfully prepare a dish she wouldn't eat herself, and Mila teased her, calling her a true cook despite her tastes. Then Mila suggested cooking something for His Highness Shuzel. Rina agreed, remembering that he and others had been invited earlier, and she wondered if baked apples might suit his delicate sweet tooth. The girl with the flower hairpin curiously asked who exactly had been summoned, and the silver-haired man calmly replied that it was Rina. This caused a wave of surprise and whispers among the girls present. A moment later, Rina was being scolded for forgetting an important task. Two men hurriedly called her to the emperor, and she anxiously wondered how His Highness Shuzel would react if she and Ed smelled sweet. Mila sighed heavily and decided to cook something crispy for His Majesty Felix. A boy nearby happily offered fried carriage, and despite her hesitation, she gave in, earning a round of applause from everyone present. The girl then explained that baked apples use a lot of butter and sugar, while carriage is fried in oil, making it easy to gain weight. With that, the whole group exchanged awkward glances and, to decide who would eat, began playing rock paper scissors. Meanwhile, Mila grinned slyly, determined to attract even more like-minded people to her cause, and Kane watched intently, not understanding why she was so happy. Meanwhile, the game's winners were happily munching on crispy carriage, unconcerned about the calories. Kane mentioned that he was asked a lot of questions, but he preferred to listen to people in person. Rina thought that meeting the emperor would be intimidating for anyone, but Kane quietly praised her for her calm, though she quickly denied it, calling herself ordinary. Soon, Roland greeted them with a stern look and scolded them for being late. The girl awkwardly admitted she'd forgotten to warn someone, and the young man hesitantly added a few words as he stood before the door where His Majesty Felix awaited. Roland sheepishly apologized for forgetting to mention His Highness April earlier, and the girl next to him blushed, fearing that others had overheard their conversation. Meanwhile, a man sitting nearby was taking in the luxurious furnishings of the hall with interest. Roland then asked if she'd changed her mind about getting a cat, to which she replied that she was allergic. After that, Renee was told to sit down and relax, and the servant, noticing the awkwardness, quickly apologized for the disturbance. The girl glanced around the room, noting the absence of portraits, paintings, and even flowers. She assumed the desks against the wall belonged to Mr. Eibel, as their arrangement suggested strict order. Rina noted that the room looked surprisingly cozy, though Kane cautioned her not to turn her head. Oscar, standing nearby, quietly remarked that it would be much quieter if not for the presence of the emperor and his entourage. Roland sharply reprimanded the girl for these words, and she quickly apologized. Kane gloomily agreed that the presence of the higher-ups was still necessary, while Mila asked if Mr. Eibel could sit down. Roland apologized for sitting next to the prince, who noted with a slight grin that she was the only woman who sighed at the sight of his face. Rina raised her head in response and looked at him with a flicker of stubbornness. Kane chuckled softly, asking if people weren't even allowed to sigh anymore. Then Rina apologized for being late and handed Roland something, causing both Kane and Roland to raise their eyebrows in surprise. 2 plates of freshly made carriage sat on the table, garnished with lemon wedges. Someone smiled and said this was exactly what Ed had requested, and the aroma of roasted meat filled the room. Mila told Elfina and Roland that the green flecks in the breading were chopped basil leaves, and that lemon juice was optional for a refreshing taste, noting that the recipe was different from the previous version. The girl admitted she preferred carriage with garlic soy sauce, and the man suggested adding lemon only if she liked a tart flavor. She nodded, determined to give it a try, even though she'd previously avoided sour dishes. Elfin folded his arms and, with a cheerful smile, invited everyone to the table, after which the entire company thanked him for the food and gathered around the fragrant dishes, enjoying a moment of unity and warmth. Mila explained that Ed loved carriage for its crispy crust and juicy center. She then suggested making hamburger steak and tonkatsu if they could find the right ingredients, and the others eagerly agreed that Ed would surely be delighted. The girl with the bow on her head noticed that the amount of carriage had sharply decreased and asked in surprise where the rest of the portions had gone, peering into the plate as if trying to solve a riddle. Then someone announced with a smile that Prince Shuzel was already on his 3rd piece, while Emperor Felix had already finished 5. Meanwhile, the dark-haired man couldn't help but think that at this rate, he'd probably only get 1. Roland calmly assured her that he had no intention of attacking anyone, but his interlocutor was still worried, imagining how His Majesty could send her to hell with 1 blow if the situation got out of control. After the meal, everyone unanimously admitted they'd overeaten, marveling at how quickly they'd felt full. Then one of the men asked Rina for dessert, and she happily obliged, while someone nearby praised the refreshing lemon flavor in the meat dishes. Kane corrected the name, reminding everyone that it was gorgeous baked apples. The others reacted excitedly, and then someone brought out the dessert, inviting everyone to try it, and Mila, with a slight laugh, apologized for the earlier delay. Elfina explained with a warm smile that the slight bitterness of the black tea enhances the sweetness of the ice cream and makes the flavor especially refined. She also noted that the baked apples turned out surprisingly delicious and juicy. Mila calmly explained to Ed that black tea was slightly bitter and should be added little by little. Someone nearby remarked that the dessert was a tea affogato, and another smiled and said that she ate with an enviable appetite. The girl jokingly said she wanted to see Baron Shirkley, and the guy asked if Rina would eat ice cream. She hesitated, deciding whether to try it, worried that someone might be offended if they found out. At this moment, Roland called out to Rina in surprise, and the other man loudly asked who she was, adding a sarcastic remark that the Emperor seemed to be a master of sarcastic remarks. When Rina entered, she was greeted by 2 chefs. The curious girl asked what sorbet was, and Rina explained it was a frozen dessert made from diluted fruit juice, similar to sherbet. Afterwards, Rina inquired about the door next to the warehouse, and the maid explained that it led to the wine cellar. Mila, meanwhile, wondered if she could make a lemon and cucumberry sorbet to add a touch of freshness. The girl felt a chill and asked if it was a refrigerator, or perhaps a wine cellar. After examining the room, she noticed that there were few alcoholic beverages, but wine in abundance, and assumed that this was a local pride. Mila then suggested making an alcoholic sorbet for His Majesty Felix. Rina thoughtfully confirmed that the king enjoyed his drink and asked if alcohol could be used in cold desserts. Ed, with a mischievous smile, offered to take some wine from his older brother Fel's cellar. The girl gasped, calling him reckless, as it could end badly, but he merely shrugged, dismissing the words. Rina noticed a bottle of gin and, remembering its juniper aroma, began to prepare a locator spell to learn more about the drink, thinking about how she could use it in recipes. Meanwhile, Mila pondered the flavors of spiced liqueurs, recalling vermouth, and admitted that praise doesn't always equate to complete understanding. A close-up of the image flashed, explaining the origins of juniper berries and their aroma. Mila cheerfully invited Ed to help her make lemon sorbet, claiming it was more fun than just watching. He readily agreed, and soon they were working together. As the water in the pot began to boil and the sugar dissolved, the cook noticed that many people were now coming into the kitchen to learn from Rina. The rest listened attentively, observing the bustle and warmth of the crowded room. Mila and her friend were discussing whether to add milk, and her friend casually mentioned that Monica's nose had popped out again. Then the guy asked what to do after the milk was poured in, and the girl, squinting in displeasure, thought that if Monica started making noise, she might benefit from a little of that milk in her nose. After this, the hesitant girl tried to say something, but the short-haired woman confidently explained how to properly add lemon zest. Nearby, two chefs in hats discussed the flavor of mint and methods of making sorbet, finding the perfect ratio. Rina confidently declared her method much faster and more convenient, but Oscar sharply reprimanded her for using too much magic. Meanwhile, Kane inquired whether anyone other than Ed could master ice magic, as the freezing process required precision. Then Mila, smiling, handed the pot to Ed, and Rina asked if the two of them could work together. Someone nearby thanked her for the opportunity and expressed their willingness to help, wanting to contribute. The young man admitted he'd recently started practicing magic, but was having trouble controlling the power of his spells. The girl in the maid's uniform advised him not to worry, assuring him that with practice it would become second nature. The silver-haired man intervened, saying it would be embarrassing for someone with a magical symbol to fail such a task. The girl with the hairpin watched him closely, trying to discern what symbol he was referring to. She then asked if such a title was passed down through blood, and the man nodded, explaining that it was a rare title, held only by the royal family. He promised to explain in more detail later, as they stood side by side. Ed confirmed the ingredients were in order, after which the girl ordered the chefs to prepare a sorbet with cocoberry jam. The chefs nodded in agreement and began talking about magic that would help cool the mixture. She then explained that the final step would be a gin sorbet for His Majesty. The young man asked if he was referring specifically to alcohol, and she confidently confirmed it as water boiled in a copper cauldron nearby. Kane added that he was planning to use the lime to make a gin-lime sorbet. Someone nearby remarked that such a dessert is easy to make, all you need to do is mix it properly and quickly freeze it. The man and woman exchanged soft smiles as he recounted how he once made a similar drink for his father, who loved alcohol, but his mother ended up drinking it all herself. In the close-up, someone noted the delicate scent of lime in the air. The girl with the flower hairpin smiled softly, feeling a touch of nostalgia. A maid stood behind the counter, listening to a customer order a stronger drink and nodding approvingly. Mila excitedly asked Rick if they could make a sorbet with the remaining ingredients, explaining that she wanted to create a cocktail similar to the one His Majesty Felix loved. Rick was interested in her idea and promised to help. Then one of the chefs explained to the others that a cocktail is essentially a mixed drink, combining different types of alcohol or spirits with fruit juice. The others listened with keen interest, trying to memorize the recipe. The girl recalled how her parents would surprise guests with a signature cocktail and how she never thought she'd do it again in another world. The ingredients were displayed on the table: dry gin, dry vermouth, and green olives. Mila smiled and asked Ed for some ice, joking that he was now her personal ice purveyor. He complained that he didn't have a shaker or mixing glass, so he decided to use a large glass. The young man apologized to the prince, who asked in surprise who he was. The camera then showed step by step how dry gin and vermouth are mixed in a 5-to-1 ratio to create the classic drink. The girl said that her parents loved alcohol and her father created a new cocktail every year for her mother's birthday, and she, in return, made him a drink for Father's Day. Rina, her eyes moist with emotion, thanked everyone for their support, admitting she hadn't felt this calm in a long time. A nearby maid gently assured her that she now had someone who would always lend a shoulder to cry on, while a man in uniform quietly watched from the sidelines. At the end, Rina hugged Mila tightly, expressing gratitude for her kindness. She responded with a short yes, and their embrace became a silent affirmation of a genuine connection and friendship, strengthened by the warmth of mutual trust. The girl told Ed she just needed to bring something to Emperor Felix's office, but when she glanced at him, she noticed sadness in his eyes. She quietly apologized, and he, without a word, nearly lowered his eyes, as if hiding his thoughts. She cautiously apologized for separating him from his family, but he calmly replied that she shouldn't blame herself. His voice held genuine understanding, and he confidently added that he held no ill will. Rina reflected on how meeting him had changed her life, saving her from loneliness, even if it meant losing her family. She thanked her fate, and Kane, noticing her restrained emotions, called out to her softly, looking at her with concern. The girl quietly admitted that she had nowhere else to go, she had no family. Then the guy promised to always be there, never to leave her under any circumstances. She smiled and whispered that she just wanted to be happy with him. After these words, she firmly promised that she would certainly make him happy. Their hands intertwined, and their gazes met, as if in that moment they had made an unspoken vow, understood without words. The girl joked with a sly smile that it all sounded like a marriage proposal. The guy immediately flushed and denied it, and she laughingly patted him on the shoulder and thanked him for the proposal. Later, Mila sighed with displeasure, complaining about the endless staircases, and asked if she could teleport directly to the top using magic. But Roland explained that for safety reasons, only a select few were allowed through, and she had to resign herself to it. Then Kane told Mila that even with permission, it would not be possible to simply teleport. This was only possible through the power of the gate seal, and not with the help of ordinary spells. The silver-haired man added that without the power of the seal itself, opening the gate was impossible, as only those who bear the symbol could summon Rina. Hearing this, she finally understood why he had always been so cautious. Ed extended his hand to her and quietly promised he would make her happy. Rina smiled softly, realizing he would never turn her away. On the stairs, they made a silent promise to be happy together. When Rina entered the office, Kane greeted her warmly, saying everyone had been waiting. In the back of the room, Roland was breathing heavily, leaning tiredly against the desk, but a faint smile flickered across his face. Roland sat down at a book-strewn desk, and the girl quietly asked if he'd been there yesterday. He replied that this was probably his older brother Shu's workspace and ordered Ibel to bring Renee some tea. Roland, looking exhausted, offered his condolences and thought the Emperor himself looked no less tired. He sat at a paper-strewn desk, surprised that a separate room had been prepared for this meeting. Kane muttered something about the old woman while Roland stood nearby, and Oscar, settling comfortably in the chair, waved his hand listlessly, deciding that none of this really mattered. Mila brought Felix some sweets, but he didn't say a word and turned away. Kane then suggested his brother at least try them, but Mila merely shrugged, certain the Emperor didn't like sweets anyway. Roland angrily ordered the frozen dessert to be shoved quickly into the mouth of the intruder, to get rid of him. Kane smirked and corrected him, saying it wasn't dessert, but sherbet, while someone nearby quietly sympathized with the victim. Kane called out to Rina, and she, visibly nervous, muttered something like "oh." Then, composing herself, she smiled and asked what kind of person Prime Minister Shuzel was, the Emperor's right-hand man and the wisest of them all. Roland laughed, teasing his older brother about the girl's reaction, and offered to try the dessert before it melted. He sat confidently, while Mila, half lounging nearby, watched the proceedings with a mocking smile. Kane sampled the sorbet, and two young assistants eagerly peppered him with questions about whether it was different from sorbet and what kind it was. He merely frowned and asked if they were interrogating him culinarily. Finally, after taking a bite, Kane noted a slight hint of lime. The girl next to him blushed, watching him with unexpected excitement, thinking it unfair to be so abruptly soft. Then he calmly told her to take her time. Roland, looking thoughtful, determined that the drink was made with dry gin. The younger man enthusiastically confirmed that the taste was indeed excellent, and the other, unable to contain his joy, loudly reported Renee's positive reaction. Mila smiled warmly, glad that the monarch was enjoying the moment of rest. Behind her, two people began to pack up, and one of them quietly suggested they go back so as not to disturb the others. Rina jokingly asked if she should throw the girl in jail, eliciting surprise and confused looks. However, she quickly added that it was just a joke, while the guy standing next to her watched her with a serious expression. Kane calmly explained that the red sorbet was made with cucumberry, and the yellow one with lemon. Someone in the room reacted with genuine surprise, as if they hadn't expected such simple flavors from such an exquisite dessert. Alfina asked Oscar where the gin and lime sorbet he treated her brother to came from and was surprised to learn he was interested not only in alchemy but also in drinks. With a slight smile, he admitted he was a bit of a drinker. Roland politely declined the sorbet potion Mila offered him, and Kane chuckled, reminding him that every potion Roland had ever consumed had backfired. Oscar added that he'd warned him, but, as always, he'd ignored him. Roland suggested that Shuzel save the gin sorbet for later, but he remained silent. Mila then laughed, noting that the idea of a sorbet potion sounded ridiculous, and the entire group, having finished their conversation, headed for the exit. Already in the hallway, Mila whispered that Kane was a bit of a problem when he drank. Rina raised an eyebrow in surprise, but then nodded understandingly, recalling how he'd behaved before. Mila, chuckling, asked if he was starting to undress in this state, to which Rina told her not to be silly. After that, they both began to eat the cold dessert, noting that it was softer and more delicious than the usual sorbet. Rina watched with a tender smile as two men on the couch discussed the flavor. One admired the crisp, sweet and sour texture, admitting he still preferred ice cream. The girl next to her thought she truly was a prince. Mila, with a mirthful glint in her eyes, recalled how her mother used to add red wine to ice cream. Rina reacted calmly, but a moment later she frowned sharply, demanding her portion of dessert with feigned sternness. Then Mila served Emperor Felix a cocktail, explaining that she'd made 3 at once, as he liked his spirits. He looked at her in surprise, and someone noticed that the ruler looked irritated, especially because of Prince Shuzel. 2 glasses of martini with olives sat on the table, and a voiceover explained the classic recipe, a mixture of gin and vermouth in a 10-to-1 ratio, slightly adjusted to Emperor Felix's taste. With a kind smile, the girl explained that there are over 100 types of cocktails, surprising even the chefs. Then she demonstrated a gimlet, a drink made from lime juice and dry gin mixed in a ratio of 1:3. Roland, sitting on the couch, remarked that the cocktail looked luxurious thanks to the olives. Mila, with a cheerful laugh, said that alcohol isn't just a drink, but an art form, pleasing not only to the palate but also to the eye. Roland reminded Shuzel that drinking was prohibited during the service. He smirked and replied that he hadn't stopped him earlier because he hadn't known the sorbet contained alcohol. Roland then declared that he wouldn't even allow him ice cream. The dark-haired man turned to the stunned girl and said the decision was Rina's. The blonde man watched nearby with a slight smile, not interfering but clearly awaiting the outcome. Roland and Kane soon got into an argument, one warned them not to drag him into conflicts, the other suggested they settle their minor disagreements on the spot. Then Mila intervened, sternly declaring that neither of them would get any ice cream or cocktails. Kane countered that nothing needed to be removed, and Roland muttered that ice cream wasn't alcohol, so the ban was absurd. Mila blushed slightly and answered hesitantly, not wanting to reignite the argument. At the end, Roland asked if anything had happened before their arrival. The girl asked him to overlook past misunderstandings and allow her to make things right. Kane added that alcohol on duty was a topic they would return to. The girl cheerfully explained that the ice cream would be served a little later, asking everyone to wait a little longer. 2 men nearby listened silently, and only one of them nodded quietly, indicating he was willing to wait. Then Roland, irritated, demanded to know why the brothers were even arguing. Oscar calmly suggested giving in to Renee, and Kane, with a slight smile, supported the idea, addressing Felix as the elder. After this, Kane waved off the shy youth and ordered Ibel to drag him away, but he insisted he was a sweet little brother. Then Oscar intervened and explained that the drink contained a good liqueur, which immediately piqued Mila's interest. Roland, holding a glass, calmly explained that the drink's base was dry gin. The others exchanged surprised glances, discussing the slightly sweet taste and trying to figure out how he'd managed to pinpoint the ingredients so precisely. Mila noted with admiration that he recognized vermouth and gin in just one sip. She thought Roland not only loved alcohol but also possessed an astonishing sense of taste, worthy of a professional taster. The girl cheerfully called the tall man Big Brother Fell, to which he asked in surprise what she meant. The other one, smiling, remarked that it was funny how even Emperor Felix called Ed by the same nickname, and agreed with Rina. The white-haired man joked that the perfect nickname for his older brother would be a Toriadan, but the dark-haired man asked what that meant. Then the girl, laughing, corrected him, King of Cocktails would be better. Roland added that this particular drink is considered the best of all, and Mila happily explained to Elfina that a cocktail is fruit juice mixed with alcohol, made for the sake of taste and mood. Mila served Roland a glass of dry martini, and he remarked that the drink was a bit stronger than usual. She explained with a smile that she had deliberately enhanced the flavor to better suit Emperor Felix's preferences. The dark-haired man confidently declared the ratio of gin to vermouth to be 10-to-1. The girl with the ribbon nodded approvingly, admiring its consistency despite its strength, and the woman next to him suggested changing the proportions next time. Mila was surprised to hear she felt slightly tipsy despite barely drinking, and Rina explained that the lime enhanced the aroma and flavor. Unimpressed, Roland asked if Rina was teasing him with such an intricate glass decoration. Kane explained that by adding a special ingredient to sorbet, you can preserve the flavor of the alcohol while keeping the drink chilled. Oscar was intrigued by the idea, and Roland chuckled, noting that it must be nice to just drink and enjoy. Then Mila enthusiastically offered to make a mocktail, promising it would be just as good as the real thing. Rina asked Dad if he wanted to try it, and he feigned displeasure, declaring it unfair. The girl cheerfully suggested they all make a non-alcoholic version, and the silver-haired man showed keen interest. Meanwhile, the dark-haired man asked a question of the tall man, who admitted he'd been eating more than usual lately. Kane teased Roland, claiming he was probably tired of potions because Rina's food was so much tastier. Roland glared at him in irritation and threatened to hit him, but Kane merely laughed, insisting that ever since he'd tried her cooking, his magical powers had been overflowing. Those present wondered if Kane's strength was due to good nutrition, as he had always had high energy levels, and now he literally began to glow, as if his potential was fully realized thanks to food. Time flew by. 2 months had already passed since their conscription. Some thought the days seemed short only because life had finally found meaning and fulfillment. The girl confessed that she had done something wrong again and was now being scolded by the emperor. The tall man, sighing, ordered her to serve cocktails and juices as punishment, to which she reluctantly agreed, realizing she had no choice. Suddenly, a tall, broad-shouldered man entered the hall and saluted loudly, apologizing for intruding on the family gathering. The girl, stunned by his imposing appearance, thought he was probably the commander of the Imperial Guard. The man in the fur cape asked if the girl had arrived from another world. The silver-haired man quickly clarified that this wasn't a family gathering, and she simply looked at everyone in confusion, unsure what was going on. Rina politely introduced herself and asked him to call her by her first name. The man, with a slight smile, replied that he himself asked to be called George, adding that there was no need for formal titles between them. The man with the fur collar thanked the girl for the delicious meal, explaining that his subordinate had praised the cheese omelette. She listened attentively as he spoke with sincere appreciation, emphasizing how deeply they were grateful. A man with tousled hair grabbed her by the shoulders and began shaking her vigorously, expressing delight, causing her to blink in surprise. Meanwhile, another man watched with genuine interest, and Rina herself responded with a soft, understanding smile. George thoughtfully inquired about the taste of the cheese omelette, as if imagining its aroma, and the girl standing next to him thought he looked frighteningly focused. She noted that the dish exuded a particularly distinct harmony of cheese and eggs. Rina tried to politely bow out, but an irritated girl shouted after her, demanding she stay. Off to the side, Roland and Oscar exchanged barbs, discussing George's hesitation to admit he was hungry. Then the man awkwardly asked Rina to stop fidgeting and act more straight, like a man should, but she flushed and loudly declared that she wanted a cheese omelette herself. Her determination silenced everyone around her. Kane advised George to give in and forget about his cocktails for a while. Renee was offered to prepare something for the poor hungry man, but George protested, insisting he hadn't hidden his hunger at all. The girl mockingly remarked that her older brother was being cruel, but insisted that his drink wait. The others, including the serious man and the 2 onlookers, exchanged surprised glances, not expecting such a turn of events. One of the men, his expression stern, demanded that at least one wish be granted, to which the other calmly replied that the princess could have whatever she desired, at any time. A tense silence fell over the room. 2 of them loudly refused something, arguing in raised tones, and the third, head down, looked almost guilty. It flashed through his mind that perhaps for the first time he truly felt sorry for someone present. Mila approached George and asked for some liquor for a new drink, explaining that if the cooks spotted them, she'd have to buy everyone a drink. George, slightly perplexed, asked what exactly she had in mind. The girl, with a cheerful smile, offered to get him some alcohol in exchange for an omelette, and the man readily agreed. She clarified that she preferred dry gin and vermouth, adding that she'd only tried vermouth so far. She then asked if whiskey would work, and mused that it could be used to make a smoky martini. The man behind the bar noted that this was different from the previous cocktail he'd made. Sighing, she thought that Schutzel, Felix, and Ed's tastes, sweets, alcohol, and simple dishes were becoming increasingly difficult to combine. She still had so many things to prepare, and fatigue was starting to set in. A man with long hair announced he was going to train against monsters outside the city. His young companion said he'd join him for a bit, and soon the two left the room, leaving the others in a comfortable silence. Left alone, Rina worried that Ed would go off to fight monsters again. She thought she'd prepare a delicious meal for him when he returned, but suddenly she heard her name called from behind her. It turned out that Shuzel had politely addressed her, asking if he could borrow something. The girl, slightly confused, looked at him and addressed him as Your Highness, expecting an explanation. When Mila heard the word Drambuie, she exclaimed in amazement. Someone showed her a bottle of amber liquid, explaining that this liqueur was indeed called Drambuie. The silver-haired man noticed that the girl seemed familiar with the royal secret liquor. Rina's eyes widened, astonished, realizing she was holding a centuries-old drink, rare even by the standards of her former world. The young man assured her that she could safely use this precious liqueur. After all, it was intended for special occasions. A bottle was placed on the table, and next to it lay a note describing its ingredients and refined taste. Kane held out a bottle of the royal secret liquor, offering to share it with everyone, and Mila raised her eyebrows in surprise. At that moment, Rina remembered that such herbal and spice liqueurs often serve as a substitute for medicine, possessing healing properties. The girl wondered, stunned, if Prince Shuzel had really been living on potions and the royal secret alcohol all this time. The silver-haired man smiled calmly and said he'd leave the decision up to her. She quickly shook her head, calling the thought terrifying. She briefly considered whether to share the drink with the others, as the drinkers would surely lose their heads with delight. After a brief sigh, she admitted to herself that she didn't want to go into the kitchen and cause another ruckus. Mila inquired what Lena was planning to cook today, but, noticing the concentrated, almost witch-like expression on her face, she became wary. The girl, meanwhile, was clutching a huge pot in her hands, giving everyone the impression she was about to conduct a magical experiment. She explained with a mischievous smile that this was the first time she'd made such a large number of cocktails and found it amusing, though she knew there would be a real uproar once everyone found out. Her eyes glittered with anticipation and a hint of madness. In the kitchen, the chefs debated the proportions of whiskey in the drink. One talked about pairing dry gin with Harless whiskey, while another suggested trying Lennon whiskey next time and insisted that other varieties would be just as good. The girl excitedly offered to show Rick how to make cocktails properly, adding that she even had Drambuie. She then solemnly announced the readiness of her signature drink, but immediately admitted with a laugh that she was joking. Suddenly, she noticed the glass glowing softly. Realizing it contained Shuzel Special, a magical royal liqueur that grants temporary warrior-like powers and rapid healing, but leaves a feeling of weakness afterwards, she became wary. Kane noticed her confusion and asked if she was making cocktails she didn't drink herself. The chef suggested letting the drink cool slightly in the saucepan before serving, and Rina agreed, watching the process with cautious interest. A girl in a culinary cap asked if the others had put their bags in the bag, calling them evil preachers. A short-haired guy, smirking, replied that it was just a future bribe, and someone in the corner reminded them that they still needed to make a milkshake for Ed. The kitchen bustled with activity. The girl ordered sugar dissolved in water and eggs prepared. One of the assistants winced in pain after being scolded by her friend for the mess, and a third demanded that Lillian immediately get to work on the dishes. The chef remarked that the mixture resembled pudding, and the girl confirmed the proportions were slightly different, but the principle was the same. She carefully cracked the eggs, stirred gently, and added milk and melted sugar, following each step. Rina enjoyed the rare peace while cooking, imagining Monica demanding milk again and silently wishing Lillian wouldn't interfere for once. Meanwhile, Roland suggested making a milkshake out of the mixture, comparing it to ice cream. When asked who could use ice magic, one of the girls enthusiastically volunteered to help. She wanted to create something softer than regular ice cream. In the background, two chefs noticed someone sneaking toward the door, preparing to escape. Kane firmly declared that he would carry out the task despite the warnings. Rina confidently replied that her gentler method would yield better results, and the two observing girls exchanged glances of surprise and respect. Orders rang out in the kitchen. The man ordered everyone to wash the dishes, but one girl stubbornly declared she could handle the stirring herself. Two others began arguing over the meaning of the word gently, suggesting they consult a dictionary to prove their point. A girl with flowers in her hair leaned over and asked what it was. Her cheerful companion explained that none of the straws were suitable for drinking the shake because there simply weren't any. They both laughed, looking at the empty table. Mila inquired with interest if this exquisite dessert was simply a shake, but Rina corrected her, saying it was a parfait. The chef looked at the dish thoughtfully, studying its multi-layered structure. The girl explained that she'd been thinking about what would please Ed and ended up making a parfait of cuckooberry, milkshake, and fruit. The chef raised an eyebrow in surprise, not expecting such a thoughtful combination. Lillian playfully poked Rina in the arm, telling her to stop using her limbs like game buttons. Rina sighed wearily and admitted that, despite the random nature of the experiment, the result had been surprisingly successful. Rina calmly explained that there were 10 sheiks, not 11, while sipping her drink. Then, looking at the confused young man, she warned him to refrain from making unnecessary comments in the future, as chatter wasn't always appropriate. The scene shifted to a quiet bar, where someone complimented the martinis and the end of the night shift. In another corner, a girl was fast asleep, her face pressed against a wooden surface, and a man standing nearby jokingly remarked on her rather odd spot, almost on top of a pile of trash. Two men discussed how Rina had become sweeter lately, even though she sometimes twitched in her sleep. One of them remarked that her clear voice seemed to fill everyone with energy, albeit sometimes intimidating, while the other added that she had become noticeably slimmer, but her personality remained the same, defiant. The girl greeted His Highness's return with trepidation, but he dismissed it as a mere monster hunt. The cook quietly inquired if Rina was there, noting that perhaps she herself hadn't yet realized how important she was to everyone. One of the characters frowned, deciding the others were being too carefree. Two nearby were discussing how their lives essentially consisted of eating and sleeping, after which one suggested the other go look at the defeated monster. Kane and Mila stopped before the massive body of the defeated Rockbeard. The man proudly explained its origins and characteristics, while the girl, stunned by the creature's size, couldn't believe she was looking at a true monster. She asked in surprise how the young man had managed to escape unscathed, and he replied with a smug smile that he had delivered the killing blow himself, though with a little help. He added that he didn't waste his strength on the weak, but he was still no match for Fell. The girl gently remarked that it wasn't a competition at all, but simply a matter of experience, which made Ed feel uneasy. The third person on stage, smiling, said that he still did an amazing job. Rina confidently confirmed her knowledge of the rockbird, explaining that its feathers and claws are prized for making weapons and jewelry. The boy listened with genuine interest, trying to memorize every detail. Kane then doubted whether it was worth taking apart the monster, soaked in miasma, but Mila enthusiastically objected that it was a real delicacy, and urged him to try it, which surprised him quite a bit. Kane anxiously asked if she really intended to eat the creature. Rina calmly explained that, according to her analysis, the meat was safe and, what's more, tasted excellent, much to everyone's amazement. The girl asked what was wrong, and the man admitted he'd heard of her ability to evaluate objects, but hadn't expected such precise analysis. He added that everyone's evaluation skills are different, and Rina, for example, even takes measurements with perfect accuracy. About an hour later, the girl gazed admiringly at the monster's succulent meat, glistening golden in the sun. A man standing behind her remarked that butchering monsters could also be useful for cooking. She suggested making a small test batch. Rina noted the meat's firm texture, sliced it into neat pieces, and placed it in a hot frying pan. Oscar, standing nearby, closed his eyes in pleasure, inhaling the delicious aroma filling the kitchen. The girl happily announced that the dish was ready. The others, exchanging glances, were hesitant to try the raka meat, as it looked like regular chicken. However, Rina enthusiastically encouraged everyone to give it a try. Mila exclaimed enthusiastically that it was incredibly delicious, surprising Rina, who felt a strange aftertaste on her tongue. The other girl worriedly asked if everything was okay, noticing her frown. Mila tasted the dish again and noticed its flavor was much richer than regular chicken. The camera seemed to zoom in on the succulent fibers, glistening with heat, highlighting the tenderness and richness of the texture. Lillian eagerly asked for a piece, and the two cooks exclaimed that they couldn't believe how delicious the meat was. A girl nearby happily thought that if they made soup out of it, it would make the best chicken broth in the world. Lillian burst out laughing as soon as she tasted the dish, and the others exchanged surprised glances. One of them asked if it was possible for someone to lose their temper when food was too delicious, and she nodded, still laughing. The girl playfully nudged Ed, urging him to try the treat, but he hesitated, warning that if it cooled, it would lose its flavor. She merely smiled and insisted he try it now, while it was perfectly hot. Alfina admired the deliciousness of the raka meat, while Rina asked the Imperial Guards to help in the kitchen. Mila enthusiastically agreed, adding that she was ready to eat another serving, as the dish was tastier than regular chicken. Two young men were frying rockbird meat. One admired the process itself, while the other advised not to throw away the fat, but rather to add it to the dish to make the flavor richer and juicier. Rina animatedly explained how to use the all-purpose seasoning with rice and vegetables. The chef listened attentively, smiling, as she explained that the same mixture enhances the flavor of fried rice or soup, giving the dish a homey aroma. The girl thoughtfully decided to add a little garlic as a secret ingredient to enhance the meat's flavor. Afterward, she served the sautéed raka with a smile and apologized for the wait, watching as everyone eagerly reached for their plates. Kane sampled the drink and pondered its taste, and Mila cheerfully explained that they'd prepared a non-alcoholic version for Ed. He delightedly declared it tasted almost like wine, making everyone laugh. Kane took another sip and confidently assumed the drink was made from kokuberry, but instead detected a slight hint of lemon. Mila chuckled softly, noting that she felt like his older sister, and he, intrigued, asked what was brewing next. Then Mila joyfully presented a whole treat, a milkshake, a cheese omelette, and a parfait, explaining that she'd squeezed the kokuberry juice right there on the spot using simple ingredients. The prince nodded approvingly, confirming her words. The girl suggested putting everything aside except the rockbird so they could enjoy it while it was hot. The young man scratched his head in confusion, unsure where to begin, but then agreed that fried with garlic did sound tempting. The kitchen team heatedly debated which ingredient made the dish so special, and everyone agreed that chicken and garlic were a perfect match. A couple of the chefs regretfully admitted they had wasted some of the rockbird meat, not realizing how delicious it was. Kane, reporting to His Majesty Felix about their safe return, suddenly demanded to know what the others were enjoying so deliciously. Roland awkwardly addressed him, slipping into the title "Sea Commander George," sensing the tension in the air. The girl greeted Commander George warmly and offered him a cheese omelette and sautéed rockbird. He hesitated, but looking at Rina, he finally decided to give in and accept the treat for her sake. The man broke off a large piece of the omelette, long awaited after the hike, and noted with pleasure its tenderness and firmness. The girl happily offered him more and promised a potion in gratitude, apologizing to Rina for the fuss. The bearded man enthusiastically praised the dish, calling the chicken sauté delicious. The silver-haired man immediately corrected him, saying it wasn't chicken at all, but rockbird, causing the dark-haired man to freeze in disbelief. Kane angrily exclaimed that it was disgusting, but Roland quickly stopped him. Rina then calmly explained that the bird had been deemed edible by her inspection, and Mila added with a smile that delicious food is also justice. Kane finally admitted he was amazed by the taste of the rockbird and regretted having underestimated it before. Roland, leaning back in his chair, declared contentedly that he was fuller than ever, while empty plates gleamed on the table nearby. The man offered to report to the emperor so he could make a decision about a new source of meat. The young man agreed, and the girl explained that there was a shortage of regular chicken in the country, and hunting rockbird was too dangerous. She asked if it was possible to catch these birds with traps, but the boy replied that the rockbird had a strong fighting instinct and was extremely cautious. He added that the monster would fly away at the mere sight of Felneil's brother, while another young man skeptically remarked that this was simply cowardice. Rina spun around, hearing someone enter the room. Two men appeared before everyone, one of them was His Majesty Felix, the other Prince Shuzel. Their confident gait drew everyone's attention. Kane caught a delicious scent and quietly asked if Rina had cooked something delicious again. Roland added that they needed to find her, and soon they spotted the girl hiding under a blanket. She sheepishly admitted that she had been frightened by Ed's story about monsters. Roland demanded not to exaggerate and reminded him not to harass Egetelos. Kane blushed and quickly denied having said anything of the sort, feeling slightly embarrassed by his own reputation. The silver-haired man asked the dark-haired man if he'd encountered any monsters recently. He remained silent, and the girl watching nearby assumed he was the true Demon King. Meanwhile, the other man mentioned that he'd already asked George a similar question. The girl confirmed with a smile that the demonic beast's meat was delicious. Then the silver-haired man, smiling slightly, asked the others what they thought, and the conversation gradually turned into a lively discussion of the unusual dish. Rina suggested cooking the remaining meat into carriage, which instantly inspired Mila. However, Roland gently reprimanded her for spoiling Agedalos too much, and Cain, sitting nearby, remained silent, merely observing them. In the tense atmosphere, the girl suggested Ed take a short rest off to the side. He hesitated, but then, noticing the kindness in her voice, he agreed and, surprised, followed her to a quieter spot nearby. Mila casually asked if Rina made cocktails, then admitted she'd gotten some alcohol from Prince Shuzel and planned to use it. Rina wondered warily what kind of prince he was when he was drunk. Then Mila leaned over and whispered that Shuzel became overly charming when drunk, which is why he was forbidden from drinking in public. Rina, at first surprised, then realized that this could indeed cause a lot of inconvenience. Soon, Mila brought a plate of fried chicken, apologizing for not showing the meat beforehand. Cain examined the dish and noted that it looked like regular carriage, but the aroma was so enticing it was irresistible. The two men happily thanked them for the food and began eating immediately, their delight evident. The third man watched silently, a look of mild surprise on his face, struck by their enthusiasm. The woman enthusiastically praised the flavor of the salt and garlic, while the man calmly remarked on the richness and juiciness of the meat. Both agreed that the texture was surprisingly tender, and the aroma left a lingering aftertaste. The girl with wavy dark blue hair was surprised to find herself eating rockbird, and the dark-haired boy ruefully admitted he shouldn't have thrown it away earlier. The meat turned out to be incredibly delicious. The blonde girl standing next to him quietly nodded in agreement. She hesitantly asked if it was really safe to eat, and he calmly clarified that she could determine that using her ability to judge, relying on her own instincts. Cain asked if even inedible items were marked, to which Oscar replied that such things were simply marked not for consumption. Mila felt like she was being teased, especially when Rina refused to make Cain a cocktail. The dark-haired man confidently declared that the situation wouldn't change, as rockbird meat was even more plentiful than regular chicken. The silver-haired man calmly added that only Felnil considered these creatures weak, while he himself saw them as no threat. Cain suggested starting the hunt near the royal castle and gradually expanding the area. He then asked if hunting permits should be issued the following day. Roland instructed Renée to identify the edible parts and report back to Shuzel, and George approved the plan. The dark-haired man authorized the mobilization of the Dragon Knights, ordering them to exterminate a flock of rockbirds the following day. The long-haired warrior readily accepted the order, and the girl standing nearby was surprised at how quickly decisions were made in their army. She flinched at the word dragon, and the silver-haired boy calmly asked what the noise was about. Then the other young man explained that in his world, a dragon was merely a mythical creature, nothing more than a legend. Mila enthusiastically asked if they were interested in dragons, and when Rina enthusiastically replied in the affirmative, Roland wondered if she was afraid. But she confidently replied that dragons don't attack people without reason. The young man smiled softly, noting his surprise at her trust in creatures she'd never seen. He promised to show her his own dragon tomorrow, a quiet pride shining in his eyes. The narrative explained that dragons choose their knights themselves, and only a select few are granted the right to ride them. These riders form an elite force guarding the royal palace, and they alone constitute the royal guard. The girl looked away in embarrassment, and the young man calmly explained that George, the commander of the guard and head of the Dragon Knights, was the most powerful warrior in the entire kingdom. At the table, the girl excitedly asked what criteria dragons used to choose their riders and inquired if Ed had his own dragon. The silver-haired youth calmly replied that he didn't have a companion, although many others already did. He explained that dragons most often appear on the slopes near Nagura, where the contract can take years to complete or be completed instantly. Once the bond is established, the dragon remains with the knight until his death, sharing his fate. Rina cheerfully poured tea while the others discussed how some people spend years trying to earn the creature's trust. Someone remarked that the dragons weren't as scary as they seemed, and everyone praised Rina's bravery. Roland looked around and quietly remarked that he didn't like this room. Then he added that the most terrifying creature in the world was not the dragon, but the king himself. Nearby, 2 servants respectfully attended to the seated monarch. Roland suddenly embraced Mila softly, taking her by surprise. She quickly demanded a room truly befitting her station, addressing him as Your Majesty. The others watched the scene in silence. The girl with wavy dark blue hair sheepishly explained that she had spent a great deal of effort preparing everything properly. Meanwhile, the 2 maids whispered, wondering what was happening to His Majesty Felix. Roland warned Rina that they were heading to the White Dragon Palace, where the creatures dislike loud or harsh noises, so she should refrain from shouting. She responded with a grin and challenged him to laugh in front of the dragon himself. Roland then asked Ed what he thought of the upcoming meeting. The young man, beaming with enthusiasm, declared that he would certainly find a dragon who would consider him a worthy companion. Mila exclaimed joyfully that teleportation magic felt like an exciting ride, while Roland watched anxiously, asking if she felt dizzy. She cheerfully replied that it was even more comfortable than walking. Roland suggested they set off, and Mila curiously asked if they could return the same way. Oscar chuckled, noting that she was clearly enjoying the process, though most people dread such journeys. Mila gasped in delight at the sight of the dragon hovering above them, while Roland, Oscar, and Rina exchanged glances, confirming that this was indeed the legendary creature before them. Their conversation was filled with a mixture of excitement and caution. Mila admired the gigantic creature with wide eyes. She thought the dragon looked much more graceful and majestic than she had imagined, and standing next to its massive body, she felt a sense of awe. Kane and Mila stopped before a huge black dragon. Mila explained that it was His Majesty's personal dragon, its scales as dark as Felix's shadow itself, and its body radiating a powerful, dark energy. Kane listened, his gaze fixed on her. 2 soldiers knelt before the dark-haired man, asking if he had come for an inspection. Nearby, 2 others were chatting, debating whether this was the girl renowned for her culinary skills and who had arrived from another world. The girl excitedly asked permission to touch the enormous creature. The silver-haired boy asked if she was scared, and the dark-haired man warned her to be careful not to anger the dragon. After a short pause, she quietly agreed. The girl nervously noticed the dragon's breath almost touching her face. Another young man laughed and praised her composure, saying that not everyone could look such a creature straight in the eye. The girl asked him if he was afraid of her, but he replied that he simply heard a strange voice. At that moment, the dragon himself spoke up, chiding him for calling his voice strange, which caused a genuine shock to everyone. The girl tried to understand in confusion whose voice was sounding in the air, and the guy standing next to her admitted that he didn't understand anything either, because it seemed like the speech didn't belong to anyone present. Mila asked what the dragon was laughing at, and Rina quietly replied that it was probably laughing at him. The creature itself burst into loud laughter and asked if the child was truly human, to which the man next to her merely lazily replied, "Who knows?" The girl curiously asked the dragon how his vocal cords worked, and then inquired about his age. He frowned, calling her question strange, and warned that asking a dragon his age was extremely impolite. The man raised his eyebrows in surprise when the girl introduced herself as Rina Black Dragon-san. The creature itself tilted its head and asked if he was afraid and whether he intended to make her his wife. He chuckled, dismissing it as a funny misunderstanding. The girl gazed admiringly at the dragon's sharp claws and shimmering black eyes, while the boy next to her noticed that she was no longer listening to anyone around her. The dragon wondered if it was really only his claws that had inspired such admiration. Filled with delight, she asked permission to touch the magnificent wings. The dark-haired man remained silent, but the second reluctantly agreed, allowing her to fulfill her wish. Carefully touching the scales, she felt a cool, smooth surface unlike metal or lizard skin. An image of her younger brother, who had once adored lizards and would surely have been thrilled by this, flashed through her mind. The girl couldn't hide her delight at being so close to the dragon, and the man noted with amazement that the Dragon King had opened his heart to a human for the first time. She happily confirmed that she was pleased with this honor, feeling like she was part of a miracle. Mila calmed the worried Ed, explaining that everything depended on the compatibility of human and dragon. He, his voice trembling, addressed the Dragon King himself, while Roland calmly explained the difference between dragon lords and demonic species. The girl asked if the white dragon belonged to Shuzel, and the silver-haired youth confirmed, admiringly calling it a beautiful creature. However, the Dragon King himself was offended, finding the comparison to a white dragon too presumptuous. Rina curiously asked the white dragon if he was the king's consort. He vehemently denied it, adding that the appearance of a woman near him was more likely to foretell disaster than an introduction to his bride. The girl with dark blue wavy hair insisted that there were more important things, and her friend with light brown curls asked, confused, what disaster meant. Then, both suddenly realized the possible meaning of what had just been said. Rina asked if the white and black ones had names and what they called themselves. The dark-haired man remarked that if they themselves were comfortable, then so be it. In response, the huge creature thoughtfully asked if he was the king of men. Mila quietly admired the way the white scales reflected the light like a rainbow and said the name Princess Pearl would be perfect. The bird-like dragon turned its head sharply and chided her, forcing her to apologize for her excessive talkativeness. Mila timidly admitted that she still loved the name. The others were surprised, but Rina praised her for her courage. After all, dragons hate being given names, and yet this one seemed to accept it kindly. The black dragon mockingly taunted the white dragon, calling him princess, and tension immediately filled the air. Rina quickly grabbed Mila's arm and pulled her away before the argument could escalate into something dangerous. Roland turned his icy gaze to the invisible adversary, demanding to know whose land he dared to invade. The horned figure beside him stood frozen in shock, unable to find the words to respond. The girl wondered aloud if dragon meat tasted interesting, recalling books that described it as a delicacy. The man next to her chuckled, remembering how much they'd enjoyed eating rockbird. Mila gasped cheerfully at this thought, and her silver-haired interlocutor asked in confusion if she understood what she was saying. He was clearly confused by her unexpectedly lively interest. The girl cried out decisively that she would never eat something like that, causing general surprise. The others looked at each other in confusion, as if unable to believe that anyone would seriously consider eating the dragon standing behind them. Soon she was admiring the mountain view that opened up, while the young man standing behind her quickly explained that their friendship with the dragon was just a misunderstanding. The third participant in the scene watched them silently with a slight smile. Mila, her gaze fixed on the mountains, admitted that she rarely left the palace because of the dangers, and now the place seemed infinitely beautiful to her. Rina warned her not to get too close to the cliff edge. They both stood on a windswept ledge. The man promised to take her on a dragon ride to the nearest town someday, adding that for now she should remain a good girl. She replied that she always had been, though she called him a rude person for it. Roland mockingly remarked that good children don't eat dragons. The boy flushed with indignation, hastily denying the accusation and declaring that he was already planning to return. The others watched from afar, not hiding their mild curiosity about the altercation. Roland paused, searching for a suitable description, and then the young man suggested that dragons most closely resemble lizards. The girl, listening to their conversation, recalled how she had once imagined these creatures, with sharp claws and fangs, capable of crushing a monster with a single blow.